Good evening, if you're in the UK, and welcome to Andy Maps Kalegen Part 11. I can't believe we're at Part 11 already. This evening, we are going to be mapping the slums down in the south side of the city after doing a quick patron vote to see which area of the city you'd like to see done next. For those of you who haven't joined us before, very loosely, I'm going to be mapping part of the Reikland, one city in the Reikland, throughout the course of this evening. Any ideas that you may have for that, you can drop into the comments and I'll bring them up on screen and we'll discuss them out and decide whether they work well or don't work so well for the version of Kalegen that we're building. If you don't know already, Kalegen is one of the more important cities in the Princedom of Altdorf, or the Principality of Altdorf, if you prefer. The large area of land around the capital city of the Reikland. And it is super important because it's a diplomatic center. It's also a relatively recent build, so there's lots of new exciting areas that we can work our way through. Now, if you've not seen already, we have got a full 10 previous episodes as we've been building up the city. That means that we now have some in the region of a bajillion hours worth of content. At least it feels like that. The very first video was over 7 hours long. Others were a little bit more modest at about 2 to 3 hours each. This evening, we're probably going to be running a little bit on the shorter side because my house is actually full of people for a change. Normally this evening, my youngest daughter and my wife, Lindsay, who you may know from the Rookery streams, they pop out and they do some sword swishing. But both of them are in this evening for various reasons. My daughter's doing lots of important revision. And that means the house is full of folk. And that's a little bitty weird when you're streaming. But regardless, we're going to press on. So, as I mentioned, I'll bring up your comments on screen as we go. For example, Martin Ironrook goes toot toot because we're here. And Alexander R says hello. And hello, Alexander. Delighted you made it. Martin then adds a quick evening all. And indeed, evening to you in return. Benjamin Koch says hello, good evening all, and good evening to you as well, Benjamin. Delighted that you've made it. Yala pops in, hi Andy, and hello chat, and indeed, hello to everybody else out there as well. And the bloke person also adds, what a fine evening to map. It is. It's a little bit dark at my side, so I'm not entirely sure what it's like outside, but it's always a fine evening to be doing some mapping. Indeed, Lindsay's recently been doing actual physical mapping, using pen and ink and coloring it in. I was trying to show her earlier today ways to do mountains. Unfortunately, as it turned out, I'm completely blind and I had to get a pair of goggles just so I could see what on earth we were even doing. The actual map's quite fun. It's the one from, I think it's actually the one from The Life of Sigmar. The one that was uplifted from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition and then repurposed with some extra labels. It's also the one that quite clearly inspired a good chunk of what they've done with the Old World map for the upcoming Warhammer Old World game. So you'll most certainly recognize it. And we're going to be using that in some video or another that we use for the streams. You'll see more about that later. Anyway, Devin also pops in and says, evening all. Evening, Devin. Delight to see you here. Right, let's bring up our map so we can see where we are, like so. Paching, make myself super tiny. There we are so far. There's Kalegen in its enormity. So far, we've managed to map all of over on one side, which is this side over here, the left side, most of the old city. We've also mapped down in one of the corners the old state regimental fort, which used to be pretty much the only large buildings in the area until the city was significantly expanded by the Hallskrug family. If you know anything about House Hallskrug, they pop up repeatedly in campaigns like The Enemy Within, but they've also been in other previous Warhammer, I almost said Lawhammer, Warhammer products. Their previous emperors, for example, they were the emperors during the time, well, actually during the time of the Old World, although I imagine they're probably going to change that. As is often the case when Games Workshop focus on a particular area, they often rejig things, reimagine everything in a slightly different way. And I'm pretty convinced that the Hallskrug family will not be cited on the imperial throne, but we shall see. I could be wrong on that one. We also did the old Garden of Moor, at least most of it up in the top of the city. There's going to be a new Garden of Moor on the outside that we'll be working on later when we do the outside of the city. Today, we're going down to the south, which is, let me grab my pen. This section down here, that is not a good brush. Let's make it a lot bigger. That's this section down here, where we've got some slums, some horrible old buildings that have either been built in a ramshackle fashion by the peasantry that have moved into the area, perhaps workers who weren't capable of getting themselves their own house, or indeed perhaps leasing a decent let. We've got ourselves a midden ball field that we're going to be adding down here. We've got a very boggy area which sits inside the walls, and perhaps we've got a bunch of older buildings that collapse into subsidence in that area. We can discuss it out, decide what you think would work best there. But we could make this a rather spooky, will-o'-the-wispy, boggy area if we wish to do so. We've got Temple of Sigmar that's going to be there. And then as we move out of the slum area into this section, we move into the primary barge building areas inside Kalegen. So I imagine a lot of the workers that are working on the barges are living in the slums, or alternatively, if they've got a decent income coming in, probably living on the north side of the river, which is a much more middle-class bourgeoisie area. So as with the previous streams, if you've got any ideas for anything we could pop into this section, do bring them up. Every single section that we add to the map, we have purple buildings and we have brown buildings. The brown buildings are all the buildings you'd expect to find in that particular area. The purple buildings are feature buildings that we're going to write up over on World Anvil. If you haven't checked out World Anvil, you should go check out Lawhammer and World Anvil. Just write Lawhammer and World Anvil. I'll pop up. We're going to be building this entire city in World Anvil. So every single location that we describe will have its own little write-up in there, a couple of paragraphs, a couple of adventure hooks. So if you decide to use this map and want to go adventuring in it with your party, you can do so with ease. At the moment, Martin has been writing in all of the locations into our Discord channel. Thoroughly recommend you join our Discord channel if you'd like to work with that. Or alternatively, Yalab has been on the other side collating all of the information from the streams so that Martin can then disseminate it out into individual files. If you'd also like to come along and help, just come along into our Discord channel and ask. We have, I think, 2, 3, 4 writers already sitting on it. Got 2 who are frequent, and we've got another couple who are about to come in. If you'd like to be one of those writers that helps us build this place beyond just watching us build it and then using it later, feel free to get in contact and we shall do so. Right, other than that, let's get pressing on with our mapping, because there's no point in me chatting all evening, particularly if I'm going to be chatting all evening anyway. If you've seen the previous streams, I kind of just go off on one. But given that we're going to be hopefully a little bit shorter this time, I'd like to get stuck in. I'd really like to have most of this area finished by the end of this session. I'm pretty keen on the midden ball field and actually bringing one down. For those of you who've followed my blogs from years ago, I've been using midden ball, in my games for over 15, 20 years as the update and the development of the original Snotball that was put in place by Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition in the Middenheim books. And I've been using midden ball as a part of my games, using an adapted Blood Bowl set of rules, actually, for ages. And I even have it as part of the Colleges of Magic. This is gently riffing off the idea that Dungeon Bowl used, for those of you who know the old Blood Bowl games. Dungeon Bowl was the Colleges of Magic version of Blood Bowl. And for us, midden ball is used in the Colleges of Magic as a method of teamwork and team building for those young wizards in training. Very much an equivalent, if you are willing to deign even saying such a thing, of something a little bit more like a Harry Potter-esque Quidditch style of game, something that the individual kids can get excited about for those that are trapped in colleges, perhaps with masters that are touring around the empire, perhaps at war, perhaps doing other things. Particularly important for the colleges where being in the college is an essential component of the long-term development of their apprenticeship. I'm looking primarily at the Light College and the Bright College there. Anyway, let's get chucked in with our old comments, see if there's anything that's worth immediately discussing. Benjamin says, oh, I do see a lot has happened in that map since last time I was here. I had spoons to watch the stream. Indeed, we have developed quite a significant amount. If you're interested in any of the individual locations and what they are, there's an individual thread for every single purple building over on Discord. So if you dive into our Discord server, you'll be able to see all of that. I'll bring up the Discord server. It's earlier in the comments. This is a link to it if you want to just type in letters and numbers or whatever. But if you scroll up to the top of the comments, you should hopefully be able to see the Discord link up there if you're not already a member of that. And I think that that really will help ground this entire area into hopefully your brain in terms of what we're doing, but also possibly inspire you to add some of your own ideas. Each of those threads are there. So if any idea comes to you when you're reading through it or watching one of the older streams, you can say, hey, have you considered doing this? And we go, no, we haven't. Let's add that in. That'd be cool. So that is that. Right, what's my next comment? We're down to Yalib saying they would have to look at old notes, and that sounds like a lot of work. I'm not entirely sure what we're referring to. Is that the old notes for the stream? Alexander says, please let us. Oh, yes, the fake soup kitchen. I'm quite infatuated with the location. Right, so let's go sort that before we start our stream. And I'm going to leave the comment on so we all know what we're doing and we make sure we finish this. There was going to be a fake soup kitchen. It wasn't a fake one per se, but it was most certainly staged. And I think that we were originally going to be placing it down here. This is a location that is pretty much there so that when the Duke takes a visiting dignity through, they can say, well, look at our good works. We have a host of properly presented peasants who are getting, let's say, food and teaching or whatever else is required. And then when the dignitaries are passed on, they go on, bugger off and do what they're actually doing. We had a little story for that in one of our previous streams, but we never marked the location. Now, the obvious location for that is here. We've got ourselves a nice little frontage with some trees in it and potentially some little gardens. A lovely little building with several levels. I think that is where it's going to reside. If anyone disagrees, bring it up in the stream in the comments bar me, and I'll get on to that. But for the moment, I'm just going to do that now. Take the location and change the colors. Now, if you want to know how I'm doing all the mapping and how all of this is being created, let me just change that on a terrible brush. How all of this is created, I did a step-by-step tutorial over on the Rookery, for those of you that know Rookery Publication streams. Pop over there, and there is a patron with masterclasses from me and other folks about doing stuff for gaming. And one of the masterclasses I presented was a masterclass for how to build city maps that look like this. I'm not using any technique that I didn't describe in that video. So if you're interested in pursuing that, you can do so. Even if you're only interested in just watching it the once, if you pop on as a patron for just like 1 month, you'll get access to those videos. You can watch it and then you can dive out again if that's your preference. Or alternatively, you can hang around and watch our videos every single week because we have people from across the games industry being brought on as panelists and interviewees where we chat with them. So we've marked in that location. You'll note that because of the way that I'm building it, I've not needed to do any special highlight or shading or any extra work. It's already incorporated because of how we build this. Right, so that's that done. And thank you, Alexander, for reminding me to do that. Next, Benjamin says, was that the one that was just for show for the rich visitors? Pretty much, yes. And Alexander confirms that, yes. Benjamin then says, oh, Andy, you have a great voice. Whatever your accent is, I like to listen to it. Thank you, Benjamin. That's a very nice thing to say. My accent is Scottish. Sort of indeterminate Scottish because I moved around a lot as a kid. My parents were lighthouse keepers and they moved to different lighthouses through the course of their career. And that meant that I started off down in the south of Scotland. I then moved up into the Highlands. And then I moved up so far north that if you went any further, you were swimming. And I lived in a lighthouse at the very, very top of the country. So my accent has picked up a variety of different Scottish accents along the road. So I'm glad you like it. Moving on to Martin, he says, don't mention Blood Bowl 3. I haven't actually played Blood Bowl 3 yet. I feel like that I'm remiss in my duties as a fan of such games. I really should play it. The boat person says, speaking of min balls, what are the colors of the Kalegen teams? I may paint a couple of teams up. That's interesting. I don't think we actually have established any of that, or indeed if they even have colors, or if they have local teams. I imagine they probably do have some form of local teams, perhaps working out of some of the inns or the pubs. And the one that's sitting down here is going to be run from... The team itself is going to be organized by the Temple of Sigmar and probably the cleric who is working from there. So he or she can organize the local teams and use it as a method of team building for their local militias. And it's a commonly used motif, shall we say, for them. Martin then adds, a good location for the soup kitchen might be off the path to the palace as a symbol to the Holscrews charity. It might be, but I think we discussed it down in that area. So I think I'll probably leave it down there. Martin then says, oh, no, now the location tags will be out of order. Yeah, welcome to my life in general with mapping. I had a whole host of location markers on this one, and I removed them because the numbering got all out of whack because we obviously added so many extra locations. Alexander then adds, we discussed some teams in one of the streams, one for the stevedores. I think, oh, yeah, it's stevedores. Can't forget that too. Right, so we haven't alighted on any comments that have suggested any areas down here. So I'm going to start off with the obvious place, and that's going to be our midden ball field. I'll mark that. It's right by a boggy area. So this is a squelchy, horrible place, probably used as a mustering ground by the Temple of Sigmar as well. So the militia will use this as a training ground. It's probably well stamped down. It'll be muddy. It'll be a bit awful, actually. Quite unlike a proper midden ball field, so to speak. But I quite like the idea of that. So let's immediately do that. We need to organize the size. Now, for those of you who don't remember, we have a scale, or for those of you who weren't in the previous streams, let's just bring that up. The scale is, let's just quickly box this so you can see it. That is approximately 100 yards by 100 yards. That's around about however many meters by however many. That's what, like 85 or something like that. Somebody can probably correct me in the comments. Let's just get rid of that comment from Alexander there. So we've got ourselves a more than big enough space down here to fit ourselves a nice midden ball field. We're probably going to be looking at, I don't know, a relatively small field, probably about 50 meters by 40, a classic small football field that you'd see sitting beside most parks. That sort of size, so not a full-size one, a smaller one, large enough that you can play a good game, but small enough that it can be accommodated within the walls with ease. So let's pull up that. We want it to be around about 50, which is about, well, let's get a smaller brush, that's way too big, which is around about that long. I want it to be about that, and we want it to be about that. Now, that's a very rough shape. I'm just popping it there so that I can then pop it down to where it should be. Right, so let's pop that down over here. And we can add some extra details. Now, if you've got any ideas for interesting locations that we can have in the slum, in the boggy area, by the Temple of Sigmar, or anywhere else in this location, feel free to add it. We've got a city walls that works its way down here. Perhaps there's a feature tower that we could mention. We've got a slum that's going to be filled with a mixture of the poor, the downtrodden, the dispossessed, and those who have nowhere else to live. Imagine this is going to be a mixture of older buildings that have collapsed and shantytown. We could possibly even turn this into a rookery if we prefer. So we're talking more of a built-up multiple-level tenements that have collapsed into slumland. We could do it like that. There's many examples of that in Old Edinburgh if you want to go looking up for examples of that. We've got a section of land here that's just to the south of all of our warehouses that are on the canal. So we've got who lies between the old wall of the city here. Let me just get a brush so that we can see that. So this is the old walls there. This is the section. What lies in that area? Does it just fall to slumland at the back of the warehouses? Is there perhaps a bit of scrubland there and a bunch of older buildings, half-built perhaps? They were never finished. This was a planned section that never got completed, maybe because the Hallskrug's flooded money elsewhere, meaning that it was almost scrubland that had been reclaimed by other folks nowadays. There's lots of different potential ideas that we could throw in here. If you've got any of them, bring them up in the comments. I'm going to very quickly throw down a bit more detail to our Middenland field, which is going to be pretty basic. We're not going to put a dividing line for the teams. My version of midden ball is probably quite unlike the one that's mentioned inside the Middenheim book, because I didn't in the end write the Middenheim book. Not that I was going to, but I was going to be developing that one. We hired Dave to do that at the time, Dave Allen. But I didn't do the development of that. I only did some early development of that, and I did the initial pitch and everything that should be inside it. And we included all the various midden ball teams that were planned for Middenheim. So I'm not entirely sure what version of the rules that they've gone for. But I know what the versions of the rules are for mine because I've got them written. So let me just get the brushes that I want in place and start this. I'll probably put a little bit of detailing in, even though it's a top-down map, just to give that idea that it's a pitch. I have the wrong brush on. Let me just change that. Excellent. Right, this is a muddy, desperate ground. It's going to be mostly mud, not grass, so I'm going to dirty it up. I'll put a little bit of extra color on this so that we can see what sort of area it is. I don't think that we're going to have any buildings attached to this. We're not going to have a nice place for, I don't know, our teams to sit under. They are literally pulled out here. They probably come from the Temple of Sigmar or locals who've come down from the slums to maybe play from their local pub team or whatever. But I can't really see this being the place with any sort of building. It's just everybody popping out and joining in for the fun, people gathering on the sidelines, which means that we're going to need a road to connect it. And if you saw our previous streams, you'll know how we have built our roads. I shall leave it to those streams to discuss it. The tutorial that I mentioned before for the rookery will also explain how this was done. I'm going to quickly add that feeling of a loose path that goes all the way around, a bit of a mustering ground at the back of the temple, where the father will come from there, assuming that we go for a father, not a mother in this particular instance. Although I quite like the idea of potentially having a female cleric in place. Nice to have a woman doing the midden bowl thing. Okay, so we've got a nice little road building up there. Let's edge that. And then add a little bit of color, and then we can get into all the comments and seeing if there's any other ideas for how we could make this place express. Okay, so as I said before, I'm using one brush for almost everything on this map. So this isn't multiple brushes and clever styles. It's just one brush going at different sizes according to our needs for the individual areas that we're mapping, which should make it as easy as possible for you to duplicate this if you wish to do so. Okay, scrubland. We're going to need some sort of bogginess around here, possibly bits of water standing, possibly a bit stagnant in places. That's a bit blurry. Let's just sharpen that up a little. Okay, cool. I think we've definitely got an idea for this place. Let's add a little bit of color. And once we've done that, I'll bring up all the comments and we'll see what other bits we can add. So a little bit of undercolor here. I'm wanting a green, please. Probably a bit too green. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, that's a bit green, but whatever. I can fade that off. Let's get some brown in place as well. And for those of you who like your color theory, there was a lovely discussion I spotted the other day about how brown isn't really a color, it's just dark orange. that caused a bit of consternation amongst some. It's kind of true. It's just like how pink is just pale red, but because we mostly use English, we differentiate these colors and view them as separate. So this is obviously a bit of a muddy hellhole. It's not a pretty place. Drop that down to size 5. I said that I only use one brush. It's a lie. I use 2 brushes. I've just remembered the second brush because I'm now using it. Let me just increase the spacing on that bit. Let's check what that looks like. It's a little bit too. So rub that in a little. Just add it up the texture a little. Okay, cool. Right, let's mark out some areas, give the idea that people have been scrummaging, messing around in the pitch. There we go. Quick and dirty, but that'll do just nicely. I'll add just a little bit of color to the outside as well before I head into the comments, and we can have a little discussion about what else that we want in this area. Okay, that's quite close to the city walls there as well. Probably want the city walls in place in a moment. Okay, let's zoom out and see what we've got. It's the quickest, dirtiest midden ball pitch that you've ever seen. But again, this is going to be quite small on the larger map. So we don't need to worry too much about super careful details. And this is something that I generally recommend when you're mapping cities like this. Don't worry too much about the tiny details. Just get it all down on screen. And then afterwards, if there's something that you want to fix later, you can do so with these. Right, so let's pop into our comments and see where we are. Right, we've got quite a few comments, so I'm going to go right back to where they began. So I think this is the nice one. The pitch will be fine. Just throw down more gravel for drainage. That's presumably for the pitch and just how waterlogged it is. Now, that would be sensible, but I think that we've got people here who are not necessarily the most sensible or savvy in terms of the best way of dealing with drainage. So I'm quite happy with it just to be a muddy, mulchy mess, because in some regards that speaks to the location a little bit better and will stand in stark contrast to what will probably be another pitch that we'll place elsewhere that will be used to put on displays about how close their ties to Middenland are, for example, where midden ball originated. Although in my world, midden ball actually originated up in Middenheim, and it was used by the elves and the humans. There's a whole story behind it, but we can worry about that at a later date. Alexander then says, so is it a poor man's militia? If we have some time, we could give a few words on who is allowed to raise militia, and are there any laws regarding equipment, size, etc.? I think no ruler is happy. I presume there's going to be a little bit more coming with unarmed peasant rabble. I think you're absolutely correct with that. Right, so there is. The state armies have got a host of laws in place for that allow for the raising of militias under certain circumstances, wars, declared wars, issues with being invaded, all manner of stuff like that. But on top of that, every single Temple of Sigmar is expected to train the common folk of the Empire to defend themselves against dangers from out with. So we're not talking about dealing with civil issues. The Sigmarites will very much hammer home how it's important that every single person in the Empire must work towards the overall development and betterment of the Empire as a whole. They're very much about defense. The Sigmarite militias, though, they train once a week, and you'll find that most temples have got at least one of them going. The local clerics will be responsible for that. They often pick the best from the militias to be the sword bearers, which is sometimes hammer bearers, depending on which temple you have. These were mentioned in, I think, the Tome of Salvation for 2nd edition. They popped up in more than one novel as well. Cut a long story short, the local clergy teach folk to protect themselves once a week. They've got a day for it. I forget which day it is. And they all come in and they play at swords or some equivalent. They are generally taught to use whatever weapons that they have to hopefully defend themselves against external attack. That is what happens in most villages across the Reikland, where there's a Temple of Sigmar. All able folk are supposed to come out and they're supposed to drill, effectively get ready to be militiamen if they are required to be so by the local rulership. Could that be used to, for example, get ourselves unarmed peasant rabble? Yes, it could, but you've got to realize the sort of mindset that you're dealing with. We are not, in the Empire at least, at a revolutionary point. The citizens of the Empire are not quite at the point where they're reaching uprising, particularly in the rural areas. However, in the cities, that's slightly different, as our agitators or Modern certainly happily take you aside and explain to you why their version of the ruling system should be the place and not the current one. But loosely speaking, most temples of Sigmar do this. Those of them that are up in Middenland often use midden ball as a method of building teamwork as well. That's something that's very much a part of my world, not necessarily something that's in any of the official books. You can use it in whichever way best suits you. Midden ball was added primarily in Rough Nights and Hard Days, where there was a nice little description about how the game works and how the rules work there too. Yalab says, we briefly talked about having a greenskin infestation somewhere. That could maybe go somewhere near the boggy area. Yeah, infestations of greenskins are, you got to be careful because they don't really work inside human communities. And I mean that from a historical perspective. The Greenskins are very much an enemy on the outside, not an enemy on the inside. The enemy on the inside is something like, say, the Skaven or cultists, mutants, where Greenskins are always the ones that are on the outside. So having them infested on the inside, I think, would be potentially an interesting difference, but you have to be careful. We did, for example, in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, an example of some goblins that were stuck in the sewers and have been down there pretty much since a large orc invasion in a previous generation. And yeah, you could do that, but this entire area was forest. Possibly there was forest goblins in the area, but they've been driven back. I'm not against it, but if we're doing it, I'd like to have a good story to make it make sense. Martin then adds, I'm starting to feel work on the harbour is causing the water to back up and saturate this area. I agree. There's always been bog. I think actually your suggestion works well. If I bring up the original shadows, where we had our quick sketches for the elevations, that should hopefully arrive in a moment. There we go. We've got ourselves shadows here. So we've got clearly, if I bring up my pen and make it nice and big so we can all see it. We've got a large raised area here, which I'm using a terrible brush. You're not going to be able to see that very clearly at all. So let's go for this one. A large raised area here. And we've got another raised area here. And of course, we've got the big raised area here. And this sort of lies in the middle. And I imagine that previously water was draining down through this area, perhaps through a stream that has now been completely caught up in the canal and has in many respects replaced it. And the natural drainage in the area has probably, with the excessive amount of building that's gone on further down, just vanished, meaning that the water has begun to collect. And in this area, as we've already noticed, water is already collecting around the old State Army barracks as well, in a way that it wasn't previously. And I think that definitely should be something we reinforce. I think that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Yalab then moves on and says, another idea was floated at some point to have a plant casting decorative iron skulls and spikes. Maybe that could go at the back of the warehouses. Yeah, we did have some sort of industry. At the moment, industry largely has been left to the north of the city, with the south of the city being popped over to a different sort of industry, tanneries, flesh markets. So we're looking at butchers, furs and skins, and that's all happening in that sort of area. But we most certainly could have something like that there. We'd need to have direct access to the raw materials, which to a degree we have if one of the warehouses is directly tied through to what would effectively be a large smithy style factory that is responsible for making iron skulls, spikes, various other Warhammer accoutrements. That could work quite well there. I'm not against that. If anyone's got any idea of how to add a bit of character to that, do feel free to throw it in the stream. Maybe a stonemason's guild is starting to subside into the bog. The guild members bitter at the constant flooding. Don't think that's a bad idea. Quite like that too. Alexander then says, I think there could be a gradient in quality and building qualities, size and quality, pardon me. The further away from the channel and the old wall, the worse it gets. And a half-sunken large building near the boggy area, which is, he moves on to say, a failed project to have housing for poor. I think that's a good idea. I like that. Fits the area really well. There's little else to say. I think that works really nicely. Yeah, cool idea. Yalab then adds, we also talked about the south side being taken over by Marienburger gangs. Something related to that could land in the slums. I think that is a really good idea, particularly given that we've got a Middenball field down here as well. Middenball, which is historically associated with Middenland and Middenheim. So having something that is a bit northern would work there. Well, it was Marienburger, not Middenland. This isn't where the Karburger lot was. The Karburger lot are further up, aren't they? North. Yeah, if we're doing a Marienburger gang, didn't we say something along the lines of buy a Gelt house or something similar? We'd probably want that about here somewhere, rather than down in the slum, possibly, or we could have them running things through the slum. Yeah, anyone have any idea on that? Feel free to run with it. Devin says, was reading about medieval cities dumping garbage areas in some town squares. Yeah, orphans physically disabled would pick through the remains for bits of leather and metal, maybe something like that. Yeah, absolutely. I think actually maybe some sort of dumping ground is a good idea, somewhere for bone pickers, for gong farmers, for all of the rag and bone style folk to scrape through. Possibly it's just carted over here. We'll need to have ourselves an easy direct access to it, which we sort of currently do with a road with a clear bridge. So possibly every night, night soil men or what some equivalent pop around the city, picking up all of the various stuff because they don't have a proper sewers here, and they cart it down and it's all dropped down somewhere in the south. That's not a bad idea, but possibly down the boggiest area. In the end, they're going to put it somewhere where it's easy to dispose. So possibly down near the walls over here is not a bad idea. Really does bring the idea that this place will stink. So that could be quite a lot of fun. And any detritus that's left in the city is dropped down there. And I imagine there's going to be a bunch of folk who are both responsible for bringing it there and also responsible for picking through it. That could be quite fun. Half sunken large tenement block. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. Martin then adds maybe some trees along the edges for shelter and lightning strikes. Along the edges of what, the Middenball field or elsewhere? Not quite sure what you mean there. Yalabads, as for the Middenball, we talked briefly about having a citywide league with teams tied to guilds, professions, stevedores, sawyers, shipmakers. I'd largely forgotten that. Thanks for reminding me of that. Good idea. Sebastian, hi Sebastian. Great to see you. Evening, gents, and evening to you as well. Delighted to see you made the stream. Yalab then adds, we also had a talk about bathhouses. Yeah, we've got a bathhouse actually marked to go here. Worth mentioning. Maybe we can have the one that was planned in the south but didn't pan out for some reason, is now taken over. Again, not a bad idea. Middenball field needs more bloodstains. Yeah, maybe it does. I was thinking the gravel would make the pitch more lethal, having played on some pitches that have more in common with a car park. You know, it probably would, but involves shipping in gravel. And I just don't necessarily see it. But we do have a lot of old ore that's going to be getting taken down here. A lot of it's stored here. Some of it could be stored here. They could have stolen some and perhaps edged parts of it. So we could use part of that as an idea. But I quite like the idea that this is, in some respects, a representation of the district as a whole, which is a boggy mess. So the pitch itself is also a bit of a boggy mess. And that will probably cause the local clergy not the dissatisfaction you might think, because it will be hard work to deal with, which means that it will mean people will have to work harder, and that will hopefully make them a little bit stronger. And they're all about trying to train people in the defense of the empire. So, yeah, I think that doesn't work too badly. Yalda says, would the northern provinces have issues with Sigmarite and Ulrican militias clashing? If we're talking outside of this map and just northern provinces in general, Ulrican militias don't, strictly speaking, exist in the same way. They don't, as a cult, work towards building militias. They're a god of war. They're not a god of peasants getting trained for war. They're very much about personal responsibility. They're not about building things together as a group, unless it's as part of, loosely speaking, a pack, like the Knights of the White Wolf or the clergy or something similar. Perhaps, I mean, building militias are not a big part of Ulricanism, but it is a big part of Sigmarism. So I'm not sure that would necessarily be how they clash. But I think that Sigmarite militias clashing with Ulricans, definitely. Alexander says we have militia teams, guild teams, and maybe some noble team clubs and teams from a regiment for our Middenball League. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. The bloke person adds, in the slums, they could have a nice hanging square, something that says, obey. Yeah, I think that possibly some sort of gibbets down there to try and warn people not to turn to crime is not a bad idea. I could see that being put in place by local judges et al. Yeah, I could see that. That could possibly work. Yalb says the water around the barracks was supposed to be a remnant of an old moat. Yes, it was, and it's turned largely to bog now. So it is, and the reason that it's still the way it is because it's sort of bogged up of late, and it's turned into less of an old moat, which you can still sort of see sitting around that section. More once the works go in, there'll be extra lines sitting around it, but it's not an old moat anymore. It's a bit of a mess. Galbin yeah, Carlsberg, Midland Gads were in the north. Yeah, that's right. Here we could have a front of Marienburg presence on the island by the Stevedore Girl, more shady side and the slums. Yeah, I agree. That works perfectly. Alexander adds, maybe take the half-sunken tenement, the headquarter for the Marienburger gang. That works quite nicely as well, because it marries well with the idea of the cursed marshes and Marienburg being in all those islands down at the mouth of the Reich. that loosely, thematically fits. Yeah, I quite like that. Maybe they were kicked out recently from their old headquarters, which was a nicer building, so we have some plot hooks and dynamics in the gang situation. I don't think that's a bad idea either. Yalb then says, I have this note in regards to Marienburg Bank, Handrich Temple, bankrolling Duke Holzkrug in return for influence, probably off the beaten path in the south part. Yes, definitely. We need to have a Marienburger Bank, and I think that's probably going to be there-ish. Definitely. Along the edge of the mid battlefield, I take it crowds don't gather to watch. I think that sometimes they'll have some crowds. Sometimes Minball Union versus Minball League. Sebastian. A north-south thing, perhaps. I think the north-south thing in regard to that would probably be a Middenland, Middenheim thing. But I definitely think there's possibly something in that. Different versions for how the rules should be presented. I kind of love that. And I can see Reikland picking up one set of the rules, which will obviously put them in competition with Middenheim, who've picked up a separate version of the rules. I like that a lot. Okay, so we've got a fair number of ideas for things that we can drop into here. Loosely, we've got some gang stuff. And we want to have ourselves their old headquarters, which are probably here-ish, that have been taken over by something else. And their new headquarters, which are down in the slum in the most boggiest area in an old tenement that's collapsed. We've got ourselves a building that was originally set up as a poorhouse that was supposed to be the great, I don't know, philanthropic event of the era, and that's collapsed into something far worse and now houses something potentially far worse. Possibly it's right down in the bog and some nasty creatures or other live down there. Nasty spiders, snakes, fen worms, or something equally horrible. In fact, it's always nice to drop a fen worm in there, since that's a good Warhammer Fantasy roleplay one creature. We have a good chunk of this section here. We can have a fen worm that's living down in the bogs there, occasionally drifts out. That can be about, I don't know, about a 20-foot long snake thing. Quite like the idea of that. That could work quite well. We probably want to have ourselves some form of tavern down here as well that we can use to represent the poor folk in a microcosm as a location, and possibly also discuss their Middenball team there too. We're moving into the temple here, which I think we've got a good bit of detail for. Do we have anything else for the slums themselves? We've got a potential factory up here for our ironworks, which we want to attach to one of the warehouses. I think that's everything. If there's anything I've missed, please drop it in the comment and I'll start getting onto the mapping. Do we have a Middenheim themed tavern already? A Middenball themed tavern? We don't really, so we could easily drop one in here, Benjamin. I don't think that's a bad idea. Yalb says, okay, we're diving more into the local Middenlaw League. I think it needs a Celtic Rangers parallel. Yeah, possibly it does. I think that's not a bad idea. A reference to the old Bog King there. Snack! Please no Steppy! That'll be our good old Fenworm. We could have ourselves a mutated Fenworm if we wanted, much like the Bog King is a mutated Bog Octopus. That was enormous fun to put together. I really did enjoy it. Right, so I'm going to get rid of that. Get rid of the word slum, get rid of the word boggy. I'm going to start off up at the top here because we've got an actual idea for what we're going to do. We're going to have a location which is a large smithy and ironmongers. Well, it's not so much a monger, it's an ironworks, which are creating many of the accoutrements that are worn by the state army up on the hill by visiting dignitaries. They'll probably be creating a variety of local trinkets that can be bought by visitors. And similar, the old skulls and the spikes you'll see in all the barges, perhaps they've got a commission with the local shipmaking and barge making guilds, where they provide many of the decorations. And that also allows their vessels to look different from, say, Altdorf or Karaberg built vessels, or the arguably more functional and more impressive if you understand boats, not more impressive in terms of how they look, the more impressive ships that are beginning to form in Nordland. So yeah, I quite like this as a location. Have you got anything else that we reckon we should pop into? Whoops, I have got my zoom on, not my brush. If you've got anything else you think we should drop into this little triangle, pop it up now. But I'm going to start doing it immediately. So let's say it's this warehouse here that's taking the goods. I'm going to take out some of the trees there so that we can get ourselves a very clear connection between the two of them. I'm then going to provide a road that connects them immediately by going onto my road layer down here and taking that through. That's going to go into the main courtyard of this building network. And as we've discussed previously, all of the paved areas, roads and similar, all use the same color, not because they'd actually be that color. This is probably going to be flagstone, some of it broken from where things have been dropped, quarried possibly from the mountains that aren't too far away. But we just use the same color to make it immediately legible by anyone that's using the map, so that when they are looking at it, they can immediately recognize what it is that they're looking at. So they don't go, well, is that grey bit of road or is it not? Is that green bit of road or is it not? The roads are that color. It makes it super easy to read. So let's get my lines layer and start popping this into place. I'm imagining a gate, the secondary one. This brush is slightly too big. Just make it slightly smaller. That's better. Okay, we got ourselves the main forge. Sitting at the side. Extra buildings, which we can decide what they are later, whether it's offices or places where things are stored, or further forges, or whatever we decide these all are, we can organize that after. So a relatively large area. Do we think this is effectively also a guild hall for the iron workers in the city? If that's the case, we might want to have ourselves a more grand building. At least in terms of its external appearance, if not necessarily inside, depending on how we want this place to look. Okay, so that gives us, now let's pop a cross on that. Okay, anything else do you think we want this location? If so, drop it up as a comment and I will get to that. We've got quite a lot of area left inside this section, this triangle. I'm not against it actually being wasteland, possibly with some older bits of building that are half collapsed over at the edge that were originally going to be down in the south. The whole idea that the south has begun to collapse is not a bad idea. It also means that this land here is cheap. It probably means that this place has got some pretty strong guards in place. It will be taking goods in this way and then sending goods back out that way. Possibly some of the locals buy like small metal things that they can sell and hawk in one of the larger squares. So they might be looking at small metal swans or an equivalent, the swans being the heraldry for the Hallskroogs. Effectively gifts that people can get when they visit. There's going to be a lot of visitors to this town, far more than you might expect, because of the visiting dignitaries, and they'll be bringing a lot of their staff, and sometimes there'll be a lot of staff for them. So we can have all manner of people who are arriving possibly just for a few days, and the locals will be looking to scam them for every single last penny they possibly can. Let's get every pfennig out of them. A storage area at the front or the back, depending on how you look at this building, with a gatehouse in place and an inner gate as well. If that's all going to be storage area, I'll drop off a couple of buildings off either end. possibly a little house where people can come in and buy little bits and pieces. Let's get my road layer back and quickly fill that in with the road as well. Okay, before I finish out the rest of this triangle, I will quickly check the comments just in case anyone's had any extra ideas for this bit, and then I'm just going to fill it in and color it in as well. Yalabads, as for plot hooks, the idea was to have local production of those decorative elements to compete with product coming in from Nuln. Yeah, good idea. Martin adds, glassblowers next to the iron forge, making use of the same forges, need a near constant supply of charcoal. I think we've got glassblowers up to the north somewhere, so I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good idea, although we could have them working together. I quite like separating the industries because that gives us more of an opportunity for people to get into conflict. Yalabads, Ironworks probably want a decent amount of open space to lay out their molds. Yes, I agree. And possibly we can use some of the surrounding land for that. We'd also probably want some fairly common goods like pots and pans, so nice connections to the locals make sense. I also agree that's a good idea. Do we already have some kind of weaponsmith? We don't. I can imagine that there's an ironworker guild and weaponsmith guild, and they constantly spat with each other. The Duke Regiment exploiting this. I don't think that's a bad idea, Alexander. Yalabats adds, I'm pretty sure Empire has steel technology. It does. So weapons could be made out of that. No, yes, they could. So we've not got anything in the comments for additional details here. So I'm just going to fill in what we have here with loosely wasteland, possibly some of it used. I'm going to add in a road to give the idea that this area here has been used for a variety of different purposes, and possibly here too. Scrubland, old buildings, ruins, and the like here. Let's go a bit smaller. There we go. Let's fill that in. There's probably some hovels in this area. People who have found quiet places by the old city wall here where they can possibly hole up. Beggars and other folk who have no residence tucked in by the walls. This area used by our ironworks folks for a variety of purposes. We don't need to necessarily specify them too much beyond they use the space around them, and occasionally we'll have to kick out folks. So it does suggest that this area, this complex, our little industrial area, probably hires folk on a relatively recent, a relatively common. No, yeah, they hire folk frequently to clean out what they consider to be ne'er-do-wells who are getting in their business. Okay, cool. I'm not going to add that much more detail to this area, I don't think. I'm just going to go into coloring this all up. It's got a certain amount of character already. I'll add in some just loose general shapes for anyone that happens to be using the map to determine what they are themselves. Whether it's loose bits of detritus or stone, or possibly the evidence of locals who have taken to living underneath some of the trees or otherwise in the area. I'm going to cut out a little bit there so I can add a road. Right, let's add some color to this. Location color and building color. Let's add the building color first. Slightly larger brush. Okay, we got a couple of other small buildings on the outside here. Not much. Some old ruiny sections, which I will color in brown even though they're ruins. Again, so they can be easily read. Anyone using the map can look at it and immediately go, well, that's clearly supposed to be a building because it's in the building color. So clearly people are using this either for living in or possibly storing stuff or whatever you decide to use those areas for. Next, we get our location color because this is a proper location. Martin is already going, yay, more things to add to the big Discord pile of places. I should use a bigger brush. We can color this in far faster than I'm currently doing it. Okay. Going out my lines there slightly. Let's just fix that. There we go. Now, if no one's got anything extra to add to this area, I'm just going to start the highlights and the shades and a little bit of extra color for the surrounding land. So I will check the comments just before I head into the highlights and shades. Okay, there we go. That's a basic color in place at least. Let's see if there's anything else there. Alexander's got one comment. I think both guilds would be working with allies of different types, and if the past Duke never gave either of the guilds a clear mandate for weapons, this could be a source for a lot of plots. Yes, it could. We had a similar plot with weapons makers and cutlers down in Ubersreich, where effectively the cutlers were creating long knives because they could, and they were weapons. And it was causing some significant issues between the two guilds. That was originally, I think, an idea that was added by Andy Leask, as I recall. It was a good one. It was quite fun to add. Yalbad, I just recalled a story my father told me. I do like stories and anecdotes. In the town he lived in as a child or teenager, local metalworks on a free day were used by bath sauna by local populace, as they never put out their furnaces and were able to heat up large volumes of water quickly. Maybe something like that could be included here, possibly organized by the Shallians to get people from the slums cleaner. I like that a freaking lot. Should we mark that directly onto the map, possibly out the back here as a potential bathhouse or an area where hot water is offered, so people are trooping into this area? Oh no, I really like this. Just like the idea that people are coming into this area here and getting themselves all nicely cleaned up. Do like it a lot. So yeah, I think we should add a little bit of extra at the back of that so that we can have a visual reference for what we've discussed as the idea. Let me just change the brush there. So drop that in the back there, and that's a place where the local peasantry can come. And the excess heat is used to boil up water as the equivalent of a bathhouse for the poor. We need an extra story or four for that and how that can be best used. It's a gathering point, so that means people will use it for both crime and social reasons. Possibly we should have some other building that's close by where there's a makeshift pub has worked itself up at the front, maybe. Oops, go away. I have no idea what's going on there. What even is that? It's not showing on my screen there. A big, massive window just opened up on my side, but it didn't look like it came up on your screen over there. How random. So possibly there's like a makeshift pub, beer garden sitting out the back here. It'll probably cause some issues with the Victualler Guild because perhaps they don't have permission to be running this. But it's in a poorer part of town and they just get run out of it if they attempt to make any inroads into that. Yeah, I definitely think that we've got something in that. Love it. Right, let's see if there's anything else. Benjamin says, why do we want to add an outlet store to it, like discounted Smithy articles with flaws? Why do we, or do you mean do we want to? And yeah, I think that having that's a good idea. I think that we can have folks coming in here, so hawkers and the like, possibly like a small guild of 5 or 6 of them, who then move out and sell across the town. They're employed by the guild, as in this place, directly. It's not their own individual businesses. And they do that. Plus, there'll be a whole bunch of offsets, cheaper stuff that they'll sell off to others. I quite like that. There's all manner of cool, funky ideas in there. Alexandra, it's very likely that I subconsciously stole the idea from the starter set. It's okay. I'm constantly subconsciously stealing ideas from everywhere. That's half the fun of these things, isn't it? Yellowbads, what I was getting at with the steel is that iron weapons be actually able to compete. Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. A very fair point. Martin then adds, contaminated iron ore dust reacts to the hot water to dye the bathers purple. See, I do like stuff like that, in that the mineral and metal changes in water and food can make significant changes to the local populace. Much as you probably know, if you consume a lot of silver, you tend to turn, well, sort of bluey gray. But it's unexpectedly really good for you with its antibiotic offers on top. It's pretty cool. Anyway, let's get back to where we were. Yellowbads, at best, maybe they could produce iron ammunition for our firearms, but iron swords, etc., would be vastly inferior. Yes, they would. The Iron Makers Guild will likely be using steel and other alloys. See, we've got different versions of how this could manifest, and I think that we should record these as different versions over in Discord. And if you're just joining the stream or you're watching this later and you don't already know, we've got a Discord server set up where every single location that we're building in here can be detailed, and we can just put down both versions, and then when it's written up we can nail down on one of them, the one that makes the best and most compelling story, the one that offers the coolest adventure hooks. And whether that's an adventure hook that's a little more supernatural in nature, or one that just really adds some really lovely interscene or inter-guild conflict. So I'd say both could be the case. And yeah, the more I think of it, both could be the case. I'm going to, anyway, get onto the shades in this area, because we're not really adding any extra details that need to be on the map. So I will quickly pop these into place. Again, if you want to know why I'm shading it the way I'm shading it, or how I'm shading it the way I'm shading it, just go check the tutorial that I did for the rookery. I think we might have mentioned that already. It saves me from having to explain how to do all the mappy bits every time, though. Let me also take this opportunity, if you happen to be watching and you haven't done so already, do please subscribe to our channel. There's probably a little YouTubey subscribe button sitting around there somewhere. Also, ring that little bell so you get the notifications for whenever we do stuff. That would be pretty awesome. And of course, if you there we go. Like the video, that would be also super awesome. So if you're just sitting there listening to our video going, well, what can I do as Andy witters on about mappy things? Go press that little thumbs up like button. It'd be enormously appreciated, because apparently YouTube likes that sort of thing. Right, okay, so we've got the basic shades in there. Let's drop in some over here. Our wall is already in place. We've definitely got a bit of an elevation in this area. So you can probably see why the warehouses have been built here, because the ground's a bit higher and a bit more solid. And we're going to be going downhill as we go this way into what eventually becomes the slums down there. Right, okay, so, whoa, my map just went crazy. Let's finish off this section and now do our highlights. Have I missed any of the shades? Oh, I've got a little tower there that should be in place. Yeah, well, we're good. Let's go highlights. Again, you want to know how all these are done, we have a tutorial. Right. I'm pretty happy with this. I'll add a little bit of color for our wasteland, but I think we're pretty much good to go on to the next section of the slums, where we're probably looking at townhouses that are gradually going to get worse as they slope down towards the midden ball field and the boggier land that you'll find on the other side of that, where it turns into proper bog and isn't exactly the most habitable part of Kalegen, and possibly we want to add a nasty creature or two that's making its way out there. We already had suggestions possibly of greenskins, although my general preference is to put them on the outside rather than the inside, as I mentioned before. Or alternatively, we also had the suggestion of fenworm. Maybe there's some sort of amoeba living down there. Although, again, the chances that they've been cleaned out are reasonably high, but possibly not as well, given that who's going to come here and do it? They just avoid the place. So there's different angles that we could take here. I shall now add a little bit of color to the one. Let me just see what we've got there as a loose color. Yeah, that'll do. Not too much, just a little bit to give the idea. And we'll add a little bit of browny color in there too, and mess it up a little bit with a scatter brush of some sort. I'll use the same one I used for the trees. So again, I stick to just the brushes that we used in the tutorial. This is just to add a little bit of extra texture, so it's not all sitting looking, well, super pretty, which we don't want. Color, color, color. There we go. Let's pop that in. Okay. I'm cool with that. Looks like we've got a nice, oh, I didn't highlight and shade that little building on the edge there. Let me just do that before we move out of here. When we move out of here, we're about to move off into the first section of the slum area. So now is the time for any cool ideas that you might have that we could add to that. If you've got an idea for people who might be living there or something cool and funky that we could add to the location, now is the time to throw that up into the comments. We can discuss it out and get it into place. Right, that's that done. I'm okay with this. This looks quite nice. We get an idea of what the location looks like. Let's zoom out a little bit, see how it fits with the rest. It fits in really rather well at the back there. Yeah, that looks nice, doesn't it? Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, let's see where we are in the comments. So, Yalab, it's a vastly different process, though. We're still talking about the iron and the steel. Yes, it would. An iron foundry be equipped to work with steel just as well? And the answer is probably not. And I think that we could argue it either side if we wanted to. And I'm happy for this to be just purely an iron one rather than steel, but I'm equally happy for it to be the other if anyone's got any strong preferences for how that can manifest. SD then pops in. Hey, SD, delighted to see you here. Where are we? What are we drawing tonight? We are drawing the slums down into the Midden Ball field in the south side of the city. The patrons did a vote, the Lawhammer patrons did a vote as to which part they'd like to see drawn next. And this is the part that won, rather nasty part of town. So that's what we're just moving on. We've just done ourselves an iron works, possibly an iron steel works, depending on who you listen to, but definitely an iron works. And it's got a nice little added pool area, possibly a drinking beer garden attached to that as well. And it's attached to one of the warehouses on the other side where they hold all their stock. Alexander drops in and says, like Andy said, we should discuss that in Discord. I think we can make both versions work, or a mixture of both versions. Maybe a new ambitious owner of the ironworks who wants to venture into a new fields of commerce. Now, working into a new field of commerce is a lot more difficult than it sounds, because you're going to require a charter from the Duke. You can't just go into business willy-nilly. It requires permission. The idea with greenskins, as I recall, was that there was a fungal infestation somewhere in the city that's periodically spawned snotlings. I think that would work very well down there. Although I think a counterpoint to that is that it could be common knowledge to remove fungal infestation to prevent that, as it would be a semi-common problem. Yeah, I'm cool with a really boggy, horrible little bit with a bit of a snotling infestation working down there. Occasionally, the snotlings sneak into other parts of town. Could make for an interesting adventure hook. Also, the cleansing of the area could be an adventure hook, and the fact that they just come back again, and they come back again like they thought they've got rid of it. 3 years later, there's a bunch of snotlings, and there's no real awareness as to where the little fuckers have come from. So yeah, that works quite well. Okay, so we are now about to move into, let's section this off so that we've got an easy way of delineating each area as we draw it. With our quick road. Mark that in place over here. We've got loosely, that road might change its shape. This section, let's change our color so that we can see it nice and clearly. So this section here, and we're going to have this section here, both of which are a bit different. Here, again, a few ruined buildings, possibly moving into proper close, tight slums, maybe a rookery, maybe tenements that have fallen into bad times. We've also got tenements up here. It's worth noting. Let's change my color so you can all see where I'm talking about. That's still not a bright color. Let's go up to bright red. Okay, so we've got tenements already here that are proper rookery sitting there. So it might be worth, if we're doing it a different style of shantytown or an equivalent sitting over in this part. So if you've got any ideas for what could go there, do bring them into the comments. We have this section here as we're moving down towards the Middenball field. Now, this could be scrubland and bog, but the more habitable part. So possibly this area is a bit open. Some old buildings that have collapsed and are no longer used, leading down towards the back of the temple and the Middenball field there. Possibly we want some actual proper buildings in there. And then we've got the southern part here, which is where it's arguably the worst, tucked up against the walls. It turns into pure bog. And here we might have our fenworm. Here we might have our snotlings. Here we might have our completely collapsed old tenement building that was once going to be a poorhouse. Maybe a mercy house sponsored by the Shallians. So that's the loose areas that we're going for. So area 1 is the largely built up area. Area 2 is probably less built up, more boggy. And area 3 is old buildings collapsed to pure bog and sunk into the fetid mire. So that's our 3 areas. I'm going to go into number 1 first, and then number 2, and then number 3. And so we remember bog, boggy, and then slum in terms of how we're doing each one. We'll do area 1 first. If you've got any ideas for area 1, do feel free to drop them into the comments now, and we can get them worked into place. I'm at the moment imagining something pretty tight that originally would have once been a host of townhouses that have sort of collapsed into each other. So super tight roads. Not even roads per se, it's just a tangle, a mire of crisscrossing pathways between old buildings, too many people living in too tight a space. But if anyone's got a different way of expressing that, do bring it up into the comments. Now, before I do that, let's go check the comments. The bloke person says, how about a failed cult in the slums? Like a group tried to stoke the flames of rebellion, but the good Sigmarite men and women of the slums root them out. But also a lot of innocent people too. We could definitely go with something like that. If you can think about how that could express as a location. SD says, are orcs and goblin fungi in Warhammer Fantasy? I thought that was only definitive for 40k. Yes, they have been in Fantasy for quite some time now. Although it's always been nodded at rather than necessarily expressly told. Until, of course, you take to references like from Warhammer 8, where they explain that the spores of the greenskins were left and drifted in when the old ones came. But loosely speaking, orcs in Warhammer most definitely are. But your Warhammer may not do that. And that's cool. Everybody has their own version of Warhammer and how it expresses at their table. Games Workshop, the official one, they are most certainly fungal in nature, but how that nature manifests is really down to the individual writer. And there's been a lot of difficulties trying to rationalize what is the 40k style of greenskin with the Warhammer world and how they express within it. I have my answers for how it works for my game, but it's very much for my game. And possibly that'll come up in the streams when we're streaming my game, but I highly doubt it because, oh, no, actually, that will come up in the streams, but it won't do for about a year. In that, this won't be any major spoiler. The Enemy Shadows introduced a character that was taken a very different direction after I left the job, which was Sievers, Colonel Sievers of the Imperial Lostlanders. And the point of that character was that he was coming up north to inform and warn the Empire of the growing greenskin threat down in the Border Princes. This is a threat that eventually culminates in the invasion of the Empire about so many years later, and we end that invasion with the third battle for Blackfire Pass, where Emperor Karl Franz bops the warlord in the head with good old Galmaraz and pretty much ends that war. It's also the same battle that the Electra Count of Averland dies in. poor old Marius Leitdorf. He did not deserve to die that day. So that's what that character was there for. And that was an important introduction because the characters in part 5 were potentially going to be going down there for a variety of different reasons. That is not necessarily how it eventually expressed in the final version of Empire in Ruins, but the version that we were going to write most certainly did have that. And Sievers was going to become an integral character to understanding the hellhole that the PCs were potentially going to be interacting with when they moved down south. And that was going to fill them with, let's say, concern about going down there in the first place. And it was going to introduce a whole host of greenskin-based stuff. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for it to come up in our stream. So yes, it probably will come up in our streams. So if you want to see my version of how greenskins resolve themselves, very possibly you'll get an opportunity to do so when my characters are introduced to them, which is going to be obviously lots of fun. Greenskins in my game are absolutely freaking terrifying. Martin says, maybe originally intended as a bigger posh house, they were abandoned early due to, what's this in reference to? Let's find out as you move to your next one. Flooding and new houses of multiple occupancy with lots of shanty-like extensions. I see what you're saying for this section. I don't think that's a bad idea, Martin. That's a good idea. Yellowbads, it's worth to note that this section of the city is somewhat recent. We're talking 20 years. Yeah, absolutely. So closely fit tenements seems like the best idea, with maybe some loose structures more to the south. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think probably that we're looking at some sort of what was planned to be a tenement section, and it's sunk. And possibly the first level is mostly underground now. This entire and turned to bog. They're mostly living on either cellars that are super damp, and they're not cellars, they were the original ground floors, up to first floor accommodations that are now closer to the ground floor, and cellars that have completely been lost to fetid under yuck. And that also gives us an opportunity to fill this area with all manner of gribblies that you might find down in those damper, horrible sewers that have found their way in either through the earth or through some other fashion. Something like an amoeba that squeezed its way in, or you could possibly have a chameleon leech or two kicking around down in there, which gives us a lot of opportunity for crazy hallucinations and fun adventure hooks too. So yeah, definitely something in that. Alexander adds, with the idea of the water level rising in the southern part, also the walls would be at risk of collapsing, are in need of constant repairs. Yes, I think our southern walls are a potential issue. And I think that the foundations for them are relatively solid, except for where we decide they're not. And I think that we use that as part of the walls adventure hook. So when we discuss the walls in the Discord write-up for it, or alternatively the World Anvil write-up for it, one of the adventure hooks can be the walls are beginning to crumble and collapse down in the south, and this is a massive problem for the defense of the city, and it's also going to be incredibly expensive to effectively repair it. So that could be a really fun one. Martin adds flooding and are now, I've already said that one already. Benjamin adds maybe an area of housing around a small square with a water pump fountain sponsored by a noble with a statue of him on top. Quite like the idea of a water pump. It gives you front and center one of the core tones for this part of the city. And when we're creating new locations or new ideas for things, it's always worth considering what is this location and how can we bring the story of that location to life with the actual things that we place within it. And having water pumps and a statue from a concerned noble, possibly the same one that was helping sponsor the Shalom Mercy House, and maybe the true story behind it is somewhat less, shall we say, altruistic. Perhaps this is a figure who most certainly wasn't a kind figure. That is often the case with statuary. Just as a small aside on that one, the number of statues in Edinburgh that are old men who do not deserve them is significant. And also interesting in comparison, all the women are goddesses or virtues, because you don't do a statue of a woman otherwise, right? Yeah. Devin then adds, can we have a dead-end alley in Area 1? I think we can have more than one dead-end alley in this area. Janice, hi Janice Sheen, delighted to see you there. In a grid, but like all built at the same time by someone for their earkers. Don't know that word. That's because it wasn't a word, it was workers. Yeah, I think that actually is a good idea, because most of the industry that we've got so far is sort of at the north, but we have quite a bit down here. We've got people who are working in the warehouses. We've got stevedores who are working from those warehouses also. We're going to have some sort of money working area. We're going to have barge building all around here as well. They all require workers. They're going to require laborers as well during the course of, I mean, this could originally have been one of the workers' camps, where the wall for building the walls, for building the rest of the city, and a lot of them could have been housed down here in the workers' camps, and those workers' camps have slowly sunk in. So some really nice buildings mixed with some really awful ones. So yeah, some sort of grid as a starting point is a really nice idea. Quite like that, Janice. And delighted to see you in the stream. Yalab adds a tight grid of tenements for workers to fuel cities, industries works quite well for Zone 1, in my honest opinion, or roads or terrace houses. I agree. SD adds, Empire and Ruins does take players south, include some greenskins, but not far and not many, and Sievers is mostly dropped. Interesting. Thanks for confirming that, SD. That won't be the case when we stream that part of the Ending Within campaign. Sievers will not be dropped. He's an important part of understanding what's happening in the south, and it won't be some greenskins. Quite the opposite. There is an enormous warg building down there. The border princes are in a bad state just now. Many of the cities that are down there are besieged, and that's moved right up to the World's Edge Mountains. The Imperial Lost Handlers, they've largely fled from a war that they had no hope of winning, and that's going to be an interesting conversation when Sievers comes through. And yeah, that's definitely not how it's going to manifest in our game. It's going to be quite fun, I think, to see the differences in how we, let's say, characterize those sections. Yellowbads, what? How am I supposed to get my players to level 2 without rat-filled cellars? Yeah, quite. Martin says, see, the walls would have been fine if they were dwarf built. Yeah, they would have been, but they weren't. An old water pump, says Yalab, with a pavilion that's half sunk and mostly underwater, anyway, can work as a fun center point for an area. I think it does. But the level of flooding perhaps fits more for zone 2. Yes, it would if we were doing that. And then Benjamin adds at the end, depends on how flooded the area is. I imagine there would be walkways and planks and all that. Yes, I do too. So let's start mapping this. Now, we don't have any, I mean, do we have any strong candidates for locations in Area 1? We've had some discussion for a Marienburger gang that's working out of here that used to be in that area and has now taken up residence here. So we could have them largely as outsiders who are not wanted, who have possibly bought or somehow been driven into one of the buildings here. That could be a fun addition for a location. We've got the potential for a square, probably in the middle, with a pump and a springing fountain, which works potentially as a counterpart and a mirror. Possibly they're twinned with the fountain over on the other side, but commissioned by someone else. And where one of them has come out really well, the other one has perhaps come out less well. Perhaps reflecting the moral character of the individual who was responsible for commissioning it, which could be quite fun. So whether that's a merchant, whether that's even human, we can determine that as we go. I quite like the idea, though, in general, of what is loosely a relatively organized area that's a mixture of tenement buildings and work camps. So tenement in this section, as you move just past the walls, and they built some of the first tenements and we're quite proud of what they're doing, to potentially our work camp down here, and then the dissolved section of work camp possibly on the other side. So these are buildings and areas that were originally housing the people who were building the expansion of the city. And as they then moved off to other commissions, possibly employed elsewhere, possibly using the money to buy their own houses inside Kalegen, perhaps there was a deal that they got that they took lower wages. They were allowed to buy the houses that they built elsewhere at a cheaper price. There's all manner of different things that we could potentially pull in here to try and add to the history of these locations, particularly if we have most of those old deals fall through. So maybe there's a bunch of people in these work camps who had been promised the world, but once everything was built, were denied. So we could get some proper unrest down here. The very unrest that I said that the Temple of Sigmar would be working hard, very hard, to stop and put down, where the cults of, say, Ronald would be very much promoting. They'd be saying the ruling status quo is unacceptable, and look what they did to you. We should do something about this. So we can have Ranaldans and Sigmarites potentially having a tit-for-tat argument over how this is expressed. So I quite like quite a bit of this here. So we've got central area with a fountain here. We've got our blocks of buildings here going around the square possibly as well, and then moving off into looser shanty work hovels over on the other side, and all bound by our city wall. So let's start with our city wall, pop it into place so that we have our boundary. I don't think we want any of the wall to be collapsing yet, at least in terms of the map and how it presents it. But I do think that some of the city wall is a bit of a mess down here. It was originally built on what they believed was solid ground, but as the water slowly gathered and pooled and the area became more sodden, the walls began to lean, and in some places, alarmingly so. Possibly one of the towers down this part of the town is also in a decidedly poor state, at an angle, leaning rather alarmingly to one side. So we've got, let's see, we're going to have a tower here as well. I'm not going to draw all the way down here because that's outside the area that we're currently mapping. I'm just marking it so we have loosely the right side. So we're going to about here. I'll put in this wall as well. Again, I'd like to just offer a quick thanks to everybody that's turned up live. I know most people watch this later, and I also know that quite a lot of you don't even watch it. You just listen to it, possibly like a podcast, and that's kind of cool. I've had a couple of messages from folks on Discord saying that they feel like they know tons about Kalegen, but haven't watched any section of the stream at all. All they've done is they've listened to them, and that's kind of cool. So we've got ourselves a fountain that we're going to build here. I'm going to probably check the comments one more time before I start filling this all in, just in case something else has been dropped there, because we've got a relatively large area and I don't want to start filling it all in completely before checking in with you all. We have, just before I join in, 2 routes in through the old walls, 2 collapsed sections, another route in by the wall here, and we've got the main gatehouse there that got updated. So a primary road up to the north. I'm going to thicken that one out slightly so that it's got a slightly stronger prominence than the roads that we're about to add further down. And I'll probably start this section by organizing the roads and how they connect. That will connect straight through to the square. We'll drop our square in there. Okay, cool. That road then moves down, and then possibly this road will end in a dead end there. Yeah. One coming out that way too. Let's reinforce that slightly grid feeling for this section. Okay, cool. That was enough for me before I jump on. Oh, I left the last comment out. Apologies for that. Martin suggests the subsiding stonemasons guild between the work camps, always looking for laborers to work on reinforcing the main walls. That's a good idea. Yeah. Particularly like the idea of the stonemasons guild as well, actually subsiding. That's pretty cool. Essie says, if the slum, has its origins in a work camp, I'd imagine many of the street names could reflect that. Vororbeiterstrasse, I am almost certainly pronouncing that incorrectly, where the foreman's house used to be, for example. Yeah, that's a good idea. If you, when you pop up that area, Esty, if you're in the Discord, I think you're in the Discord, as I recall. If you're in Discord, if you could add those ideas in, and names in particular, because it would be really fun if we started naming some of the streets as well. And if you've got any ideas for street names, that would be deeply appreciated. SD adds, as the next one, maybe some of the people who used to be workers and are stuck here still use their old job titles as nicknames as well. That's a good idea too. It just adds character to the area. Yalab adds, I posted a possible inspo for the sunken water source in Zone 2 in the new Kalegen channel in Discord. It's an old royal spring we have here, which was publicly accessible for a small fee. Okay, so if you haven't joined our Discord, here's a link for it here as I just pop up there. There have been, have I just opened it up over here? Oh, look at that. Some new bits just posted there by Yalab, the royal string, possibly an idea for half-sunk water source in the second area. Because we can't post many links here, because of the way YouTube works, we're dropping them all in Discord. So do check in Discord for any discussion about any of the links that have gone up. SD then says some streets could have been closed off by either collapsing buildings or the locals on purpose. I agree, which is why I think that I'm going to end this road here and then potentially continue on the other side. A collapsed building, which has then been repurposed and then turned into another one, as what was the collapsed building becomes the foundations for something that gets built on top. Yeah, that works quite nicely. Pumpenplatz would be German for the water pump square. And I mean, the word Pumpenplatz in English sounds vaguely ridiculous. So I really quite like that. Janice suggests a laundry near the fountain with a yard or area full of washing lines. You know what? I quite like that too. Using the fountain for far more practical reasons. Why would they use that? It suggests that the water is getting pumped out as well. So that if you actually consider it, if it was just dirty water, it wouldn't be any good for cleaning. So clearly the water is being pumped in and out, or it's pumped in and it goes out somewhere and it gathers elsewhere. So possibly the old wash water washes up as a pool further down here somewhere, as it's, I don't know, underground piped and comes out somewhere down there. There's a story there that I think would need to be told to make that make sense. But I quite like the idea that the water here stays fresh and cleans itself and cycles itself out, because that would make for, naturally, it would make for that use as an outcome. And we would almost certainly have some folks complaining about that, potentially attached to the people who originally founded it, but it's down in the slums. So who's going to stop them? It could be a really nice gathering point where people in the morning or the early afternoon are out washing their clothes on whatever their equivalent of their scrubbing boards are. I think there's a lot to that as a potential. Yeah, quite like that. Martin says, if you pop up a map image with the new areas on it, I'll get them cut out and into Discord when I get home from work tomorrow. Sounds perfect. Yeah, I'll pop up a map for you once the stream's finished so that you've got access to it. Okay, so I think we've got enough of an idea for what this area looks like. So I'm going to just start filling in all the details with pen work. I'm going to start with our roads for the ones that we know we're doing. I'll have it's starting off with a nice road that goes along the wall and that road petering off as we move down. We need quite a lot of connecting sections here. By doing these road sections, it also gives us a very easy opportunity to work section by section as we develop the areas. It's easier to just draw one bit, then the next bit, then the next bit, than try to draw the whole thing at once, which can sometimes be a touch on the demoralizing side when we're working our way through it. We're going all the way down to here. A road that's about there. And then some of these will just turn into looser ground. It connects through, yeah, tighter grid pattern to the top. And then what would have been a relatively nice area down by the south, which has turned bad as it's sunk. Yeah, okay, this is all working. I'll just quickly check the comments before I move on, because it's we're starting to develop a recurring theme of various fluids being poured towards the less fortunate. Well, you know, such is life. Benjamin adds, so we have a plumbers guild then with a guild master from Tillia named Mario. Well, we've already made a Mario joke, not here, but I did one in the I think actually Andy Leask wrote this one. Did he? Or did I add? No, I added this one. Mario and Luigi joke and the Bog King section inside the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set. So if you go check that in the starter set, you'll see that there is indeed a reference to Mario and Luigi already. Yeah, good times. I do enjoy a rubbish reference or four. Right, let's start filling out these areas. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, we've got an area up here which feels like it should have some trees on it, or at least some looser vegetation. So I'm going to quickly add that before I go drawing all this area. And again, if you want to know how I'm doing this, we did do a tutorial. That saves me having to explain it again. Okay, so let's add a little bit of vegetarian around these areas. Vegetation, probably not vegetarian. Yeah, that just adds a little bit of extra character. Yeah, I like that. Cool. Right, let's get over and build this stuff. Buildings. Starts off with tenements that have perhaps gone a bit sour, and then turns to looser buildings that were originally workhouse has gone a little bit south. So our block, for our first block, is this. Let's make it a proper block with a central area. Okay, just imagining what this looks like before I start detailing it out. That's pushed right up against the wall, slightly, it says lower than the wall at the moment, but I'm going to change that, give it a harder edge in the back end of the wall, because it rises above the wall, I think. A road that comes in here as well. Road. Here we go. And that's quite a wide one because it had originally been a road that went through, so I'm going to move that over slightly and connect it directly through to the square. Love it. Right, back to our lines. Did I leave a comment up? No, I didn't. Okay. I can imagine the bottom floors being dominated by business, top floors move to living. Starting off in what would have been a relatively salubrious area, but we're on the outside of the old walls. This has turned kind of to slum. Let's add a couple of cracks and messed up parts in our roofing. And I think I'm going to do two of these in largely a similar fashion that were built around the existing. Here we go. Let's pop it here and then have an additional building on the edge. And we can have a area sitting there. Yep. Yeah. I can sort of see what these buildings look like in my head now. Okay, so once I've done this little section here, I'll check the comments again just in case there's anything that needs to be addressed. And we'll address that. Then I'll get straight back in and detailing the next section. And that will be the loose process until we've got this area completely finished. We're currently sitting at UK time, about 8:40. We'll be on for a wee while yet, so I'm hoping that we can get the majority of this section completed. I'm very keen to connect this part of the city through to the State Army Barracks so that we can see the whole thing as one area. Let's get my road layer. Excellent. Love it. Okay, so that's step one. I'm going to go check the comments again. As I do that, just take my glasses off for a moment because it's steaming up. So Benjamin adds, think about all the health benefits of lead piping. Yes, quite. We could do with more heavy metals in our diet, couldn't we? As Alexander then adds, I have to step out for the night. It was a delight for you to step in while you could. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the stream. I will. You'll catch up over the weekend. Delighted to hear that. Looking forward to your extra inputs. Also, I have a small comment here. It tells me that my connection is super unstable. Now I'm not on Wi-Fi. I'm wired in, so it shouldn't be. So I apologize if I'm coming through in a very poor fashion. If someone could tell me whether I'm all pixelated and low res, that'd be really nice. And if I'm not, I'll be delighted. Moving down to Yala, but all right. Unrelated to anything we've been talking about so far. Just had a memory flash about something cool looking, and now I want to figure out how to include it. Oh, I'm beginning to like this already. Have you heard of Theo Jansen and his Strandbeats kinetic sculptures? Yes, I have. Can we have something related to that as a possible experimental mode of transportation to our war machine? I'm not sure how we could incorporate that with these. See if you can come up with an idea for that. So I can get on with the mapping, because I don't want to think too much about that one when I've got a lot of mapping in front of me. Do we need a contrasting barber surgeon or other healer down here? Possibly. We've already got some form of healer up in the north with a variety of different options. Yeah, possibly, Martin, if you can think of a good idea there. Martin then adds, not noticed any lag or stuttering, but on my mobile, so you are tiny. I am not noted for being tiny when people see me face to face. Particularly at the moment where I'm a little bit tubby, need to lose some weight. SD adds, quality seems fine to me at least. I'm delighted to see that. My little symbol in the corner has just vanished. So hopefully the quality will stick. Now we haven't got any extra ideas for anything going here. So I'm going to drop in. SD also adds just a little bit there. Maybe I'm going blind. Having said that, amusingly, we were doing maps. I mentioned this on Twitter. I don't know if I mentioned it anywhere else. Did I mention it anywhere else? No, just on Twitter. Lindsay was creating some maps, which Erin, and you may know Erin already. Erin did the picture for Klumpenkrog. If you know Klumpenkrog from the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set. And she did a fine job with that. And she's helping us with production. And she asked for some props to do a little video thing with. So Lindsay has been building a map. Now, if you know the Black Library book, The Life of Sigmar, it's got a little map in the front that came from Fantasy Roleplay. And she's been doing a version of that. And I've been teaching her how to do physical mapping. But as it turns out, I'm completely blind nowadays. And one of the reasons that I really enjoy working on my Cintiq, which is this big screen down here, which is what I'm mapping on. One of the reasons I enjoy that is because I can zoom into any size that I want, obviously. And it had, in many respects, made me immune to the awareness of just how blind I'd got, because I could just zoom it up to the scale that I was comfortable with. And away I went. Not a problem. Super easy. Until I was confronted with a piece of paper that was not much more than about, I don't know, about so big, for those of you who are actually watching. And I tried to look at it and realized that I had to hold it about arm's length before it came into focus. And I was like, uh-oh, glasses time. Fortunately, from when I was last painting miniatures, I purposely bought myself some what effectively are goggles, really high magnification glasses, so that I could just pop them on and get a magnified look, effectively like putting magnifying glasses in front of your eyes. And I bought those the last time I was painting models. In fact, that was quite some time ago, and it included some Midden Ball miniatures. In fact, some of those might be available on my old Blogger blog. I'm going to pop a link up for that for anyone who's interested in my old Blogger blog. I recently made a post over there about why I won't be buying Hogwarts Legacy, you know, as you do. Let me just pop that up as a link. There you go. That's my old blog. And somewhere in the depths of that blog, somewhere, beyond the fact there's some fantasy roleplay stuff and there is some Warhammer gubbins, there is some of my old Midden Ball teams. I wrote an entire set of rules for the previous edition of Blood Bowl to the one that we currently have. No, in fact, 2 editions back, because they reissued it again, didn't they? So, yeah, I had a complete set of Blood Bowl rules, which worked really well. It was super, super fun. And we used those for the colleges, inter-college games that we were running for the apprentices, which was quite fun. I'm actually considering doing a new set of rules to match the current version of Blood Bowl to reflect our version of Midden Ball and how it plays out. We have quite a different rule set to standard Blood Bowl for that. And it was good. Lots of fun, but largely only fun if you enjoy playing Blood Bowl, which I happen to do. It's a fun game. Let me just pop this one in here. I'm going to finish off this block. I'll check the comments one more time. And then continue on as we move ourselves towards our Pumpy Square here. I'm quite liking the idea of some of the buildings here being ruined, have collapsed. Excellent. The original plans for the city not quite matching the amount of money that was thrown at it. Some of these buildings would have been raided for materials as well, especially the ones that are no longer inhabited. Interesting. Not what I originally expected to be drawing when we were going through one of the poorer, slummier parts. There's a far more regimented setup, and I quite like that. We can do we can get it going curlier and messier as we work our way down through towards the boggiest parts. Okay, let's just double check the comments there. We're at 4 marked healing related locations so far overall. If that's the case, that's probably enough for us to go with. We probably don't want to add another one unless necessary. I've caught the Tubby perk as well. Sadly, COVID really did it in for me. The Tubby perk is proving somewhat difficult to remove. I'm a tad overweight. Lindsay's just rejoined a gym actually, because she's obviously, because we're going to be streaming now weekly with the game, and it's not just the camera sitting face on like so. She's feeling like she'd like to lose some weight for that, just because who doesn't? It's a good opportunity to do so. It's a good excuse at least to, there we go, reassess where we are. And we're of an age where losing weight is tough enough, so if we've got an excuse for it, all the better. She was actually, I'm going to make a pretty big building here, I think, as well. She was actually using her character as motivation for doing her workouts, in that she was imagining she was her character, which made it a little bit more palatable to be sitting on, say, a rowing machine, rowing away from, or perhaps chasing cultists, or using the band stretchy things and imagining that she was pulling her bow. She's playing in the stream an elf, which we currently have a crappy piece of artwork up for somewhere online. I do not like it. Currently working on an alternative. In fact, I might show you the alternatives that we're building on just now. A nice little aside from what we're doing. There we go. Right, let me bring up the last few comments before I carry on. Benjamin says, so clocking out as well. A delight seeing you, Benjamin, while you made it. You lasted for a good couple of hours. Was relaxing evening watching with you. It's always fun, I find. I quite enjoy the Thursdays, sitting back, waxing lyrical, chatting with cool people about cool stuff that we all love. and then hammering it out into an interesting set of locations. It's always good fun. That bloke person adds, love the horse homebrew that you made there. My GM is using them now. Yeah, I'm going to be doing an update for those as well. I'm not sure if you're aware, but over on the Lawhammer blog, we've been slowly, that's the patron one, posting our house rules for how we're going to be playing during the stream. And our house rules version of the rules are really quite different to the printed ones. They're the same core, in that we still have tests and contested roles and our success levels and how they all work, but it's all massively streamlined to make the game run much more smoothly at the table. Advantage has been effectively gutted. Things like resilience and resolve have been removed entirely. The whole concept of the way successes are generated and quickly used at the table have also been updated significantly. And we're posting that all up as house rules over on the blog. And a part of that might actually be doing a complete rejig of the house rules for the horses as well, because I do love the horses rules. They were good fun to put together. It was a nice aside not long after resigning from the producer's job, because I just needed some sort of outlet for my Warhammery stuff that was burning away, and it was a nice thing to do. Martin then adds, we don't have an apothecary yet. Maybe find some damp conditions ideal for growing medicinal compounds. Yeah, you're right. We don't have an apothecary yet, and having one is a good idea, primarily because it is one of the core careers inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay course book. So having at least one reflection of that. One way to, if you're ever building an area for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, one way to help build that area is run through all the careers and go, have I represented that career? And the answer is no. You say, can I and should I for this location? For example, an agitator makes an awful lot of sense in any city, this city in particular, where you might find that some of the more rural careers don't make as much sense for including in a city. And the flip side of that is, if you're building a lovely little idyllic rural location somewhere, having an agitator running through that may seem a little bit odd, as may a barber, surgeon, or an apothecary. But having an apothecary here, I think, is a really good idea. And I don't think that putting it elsewhere makes any more sense. I mean, we're right by a boggy area, potentially full with all manner of weird stuff growing that could be used. So yeah, there's a couple of fun adventure hooks we could get out of that as well. Martin says, eagerly waiting the crit update to see what criticals. Let me just take a moment to pause. I can hear Yalib cringing, going, don't pause, keep mapping. But criticals are a pain in my arse. I can't decide what way I want to do it because I want them super fast at the table. But at the same point, I like the way that criticals at least manifested in first and second edition, to a degree, fourth edition as well. Less so in third, but I like the way they manifest, and I like them. And I don't want to make significant changes. So I have come up with several alternatives, and none of them really do it for me. It's one of the reasons that my blog posts on the Patreon just stopped about it, was because when I landed upon my solution, I was like, this is it. I went, this is it, and I don't like it. Damn it. Oh, no. So I'm currently still unsure. You'll probably find, though, that that's going to get pinned down with about the next week, because we've got the table in our other room. I should do a quick video, actually, about our other room, because we finished building it now. We've got the table in there. The cameras have gone up. The mics are all up. The cameras aren't working like we want, which is an absolute arse, but we're hopefully filming again tomorrow, and it'll be pretty cool. Hopefully. We're going to be doing a complete session and filming it tomorrow, hopefully. So given that that's all in place, we're like this close to going live, and I need to have all of the funky rules in place if I'm going live, which means you're going to see an answer to that pretty damn soon. I am currently, though, unsatisfied with what we currently have. That is not new for me, but I'm sure I'll figure it out pretty fast. It's got to be fast. It's got to work at my table, and it's got to be super characterful. One of the issues I face is that the way we've done criticals and how they manifest when you roll a critical roll is, if you roll, say, 11, that would be a +1 critical. If you roll 22, that'd be a +2 critical. 33, a +3 critical. And I've got to ensure that those criticals at +1 don't just become repetitive. But I'm getting there. I've almost nailed it, just not quite yet. I'm sure I'll nail it relatively soon. Okay. Let's do this block, and I'll go check the comments again. I'm going to have a few more broken bits in this section. Well, go from there probably. Let's say that was a road. There was a building here that's collapsed as well. And it's spilled over the road like so. So there was a road there moving into a building that isn't so there. Another tight one. One of the ways of very quickly differentiating between areas that are slum and areas that are not is often to just simply lower the size of the buildings. In the end, you want it to be super easy to read, and that's difficult when you move into slum areas where it's all piled on top of each other. So you don't want to have lots of, well, too many tight winding roads. You want to hint at those instead with your main thoroughfares being nice and clear. But I'm definitely going to go for a bit more of a pile as we move past the square. Okay, I'm going to finish this block, as I said, check comments again, then do this little section here. No one been beside it. Bit of scrubland at the back. That's also scrubland. Moving up to the tighter buildings over here. Imagine there's probably some animals, chickens, some hogs sitting at the back here in some of the old ruins. Maybe some goats. Yeah, okay, that's beginning to pile up a little bit. Let's check the comments and I run down. Yalb says an apothecary sounds fun. Great, I agree. And gives us potential to time the greenskin infestation. Interesting fungus. Only consideration to place it elsewhere would be to strengthen that link. Yeah, I agree. And I think having a little bit of distance, so there's a hike down through the areas. One of the hidden things with adventure hooks is to not just think about the deed, but think about the story that will naturally occur from where the players are going to go. If we, for example, have ourselves an apothecary that say here, and the apothecary says, I want stuff from the boggy place. That's a pretty simple adventure hook. So then they have to go down through that entire boggy section, past the Temple of Sigmar, past the Middenball field. They could potentially encounter NPCs as they go, and then into the boggy section at the bottom. It gives them an opportunity to see different parts of the town. And if we naturally align the apothecary and place it down here, for example, with the boggy part, then we no longer have any of the traversal aspects to the storylines that we could add. So I would generally, for at least stories like this one, suggest having the apothecary up here in the more civilized part of the slums, and then we can go down to the less civilized part of the slums as we go. Whoa, okay, I see how it be. I'm not quite sure. Oh, is that with me doing an aside there? Andy, you have developed a demi-lance for your... have I developed a demi-lance for the game? Now, this is a big thing. Back when I was the producer for Warhammer, and the core rulebook came out, and I was halfway through at that point doing the final edits, and it was just released. And that came as somewhat of a surprise. It just came out. There was a host of things that hadn't been patched up. And one of those was the demi-lance. In that, a demi-lance was required for one of the careers, but there was no demi-lance rules. I then proceeded to try and get that demi-lance rules, which had been written, into the core book. And there started a whole legacy of issues between layout editing and me going, can't we just frickin' fix this? And the number of times I thought it was fixed and it wasn't became legendary. Over in the Rat Catchers Guild, there was all manner of Demi-Lance chat. And by the end of it, I was thoroughly fed up with the fucking things. And yeah, there was pictures posted of Demi Moore being a Lancer and all manner of crazy stuff. But yeah, Demi-Lances vanished. Same with the silly net rules that vanished. The same with the shield rules, which got spread across the book in a weird way. There was all manner of little details that once I became producer, wanted to fix, but the core book was already put in place by that point. So I had to stick with what was inside the core book. So have I developed a Demi-Lance for my game? I absolutely have. Yes. Oh, by the way, as a small aside, I also commissioned an adventure about trying to find the fabled Demi-Lance, but I left the job before that one came to pass. Jalab, going back to the map, I guess having an apothecary here can also work, as we can create links to it from various doctors and power stations across the city. We can. Is this area potential for the Skaven to have some presence, or maybe human collaborators? Sort of Cult of the Yellow Fang type idea. There is always potential for Skaven to have influence. We have already decided that this place is not undermined. We have no connection to the Under Empire here, which means that if the Skaven are here, they are mixing with the populace above ground, and this would be the perfect place for them to hide. Dirty, filthy sewers that are wet, they're going to be immune to all the diseases and whatever else may be coming out. Not sewers, pardon me, but sunken areas. I think here is the obvious place to have some Skaven hooks for them attempting to infiltrate the city, because they are political creatures by nature. The Horned Rat will be exceedingly interested in what is being built in Kalegen and extremely dissatisfied that it's not yet being properly monitored by at least someone that is somehow connected to at least one Gracier somewhere. So yeah, definitely something in there. I think that's a good idea. Yab says, a very quick, going back to crits, have you looked at the crit rule changes in Up in Arms? Yes, I have. No thanks. Extremely boggy and constantly waterlogged area seems at least likely space for Skaven to me. Like a least likely. For me, it seems almost the opposite. It's definitely a Skaven place. Rats, after all, often live in bogs themselves and in watery areas. Our sewers are exactly this, but, you know, rat-filled. So I'm not against that idea in general. Janice says, plus plenty of little kids who might be suppliers to the apothecary. They farm different weeds, random corners of ruins, guard their patch. See, this is something that I do like. Now, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. One of the difficulties that I faced when I was producing Warhammer was that everybody that wanted to write for Warhammer was basically me. And I don't mean me. I mean white, often in their 30s to 40s, or sometimes in their 50s and 60s, and male. And they all produced the same sort of material for locations. Now, I didn't, because I purposely look at my own prejudices when I write, and I try to make sure that I don't. But even then, I was filled with my own issues. It's one of the reasons why Lindsay did so much writing for the course book, and also added extras for Ubersreich, was because other people who aren't me add completely different styles of location. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing the stream this way, rather than just me mapping it out and making it up as I go, which is what I would do for my home games. It's because everybody's going to add loads of really cool extra ideas that I might not have thought of. And it's something that Lindsay in particular is very, very concerned about, because a lot of the locations that interest her don't interest other people, are not initial options. They generally always go for the same orphanages, the same guilds, the same this, the same that, where she was coming up with a variety of new locations that were based around life in a way that I hadn't considered. I won't go into any of the details because I can't recall which one I'm bringing out, and I don't want to put words in her mouth. But loosely speaking, this stuff and ensuring that we get life at all levels, so ensuring that we get not just our state army barracks, which characteristically would normally be a male-dominated environment, but we have kids, We have areas for different species. We have areas for different genders to gather. We have representation in a variety of different ways. We've got people from different parts of the world gathering in different parts of the city. The fact that we've got such a diplomatic place means that we should almost certainly not just think about Marienburgers and the Middenlanders, which we've already said, but we should potentially also consider the gathering of Wissenlanders or people from Nuln. We should consider the gathering from the north. Do we have any Norse folk or any of that business? Is there small shanty towns that come from one place or another, and exactly how we can express those? Particularly given that we have got ourselves somewhere that's going to have diplomats from around the world popping in, they are going to bring staff, and sometimes they're going to bring the potential for an entire enclave to build inside our city. And that's something that we should definitely consider as we move into our middle class areas. I sort of went on a really random one there without having any strong point, but loosely speaking, I just wanted to bring this up because I do like having lots of different ideas. And if you have any ideas that you think are perhaps not an expected thing for Warhammer, they're probably the ideas that I'll enjoy most. SD has a gutter runner or two using a collapsed building as their day hideout. Yeah, gutter runners, they are loosely speaking tied directly to a single clan. And that's a clan of assassins. I mean, that's a big stereotype because it's a full clan filled with all manner of folks. But our gutter runners, why would they be here? So that would need to be answered. Why would Clan Eshin in particular, where they generally come from, be interested? I'm not sure they would. I'm not sure they wouldn't, but I'm not sure they would. If you're building Skaven into your story, you can't just have random Skaven. They all come from a clan. They all have a purpose. They'll all be here for a reason. And if you build in one Skaven, you need to build in at least another 10. And that's not just because rats swarm. It's because the Skaven are political and they are not this monolithic block that they're often portrayed at in adventures. It's something that really bugs me with much of the work that I was given from some writers concerning Skaven as bad guys. They were always working together like this great big family of rats. It's not what the Skaven do. If you have Skaven, you need at least 2 factions, because the second that one Skaven wants to do something, there'll be another one trying to stop them. Every time. Often the best ally you can have against the Skaven is other Skaven. Not necessarily you want to band up with them, but desperate adventurers. You want to give them those options because that's what makes the game a little bit more fun. Plus, who doesn't want to roleplay out an encounter with Skaven? I guess if it came to Overland, it would make sense. I was thinking in terms of digging up from below. Yeah, I agree completely with that point. And the only way it makes sense is Overland. But I think that this would be a place that they would naturally gravitate to because it's something that they themselves can hide in and are much safer than, for example, almost any other part of the city where they're going to stand out with their, let's say, their big noses. But they can live down in the bogs and not worry about it. To them, that's as safe as us living inside a living room. We don't consider this to be a dangerous place where we're going to catch disease. They don't consider a disease-ridden bog, as we would see it, to be anything other than a safe place to hide. Somewhere that's potentially warm, somewhere that's potentially good as a warren, that they can separate themselves from the people who will, if they discover them, want to kill them immediately. You also have to realize that they won't be seen as Skaven, they'll be seen as mutants. They'll be seen as beastmen. Beastmen have infiltrated the city. Oh my God. They are going to be killed. Martin says, still trying to squeeze in some dwarves somewhere. Yeah, we just need to have a good diplomatic route for that happening. Yalb says, I'm pretty sure we've hit 75% of these things to some degree already across all streams. Yeah, we have. We have hit most of those. Some are just waiting until we get to the better parts of town, and yes, they are. Martin says, if it's an expected area, maybe play against it. The local rat population is being manipulated by something else, or a Gur practitioner trapped in rat beast form. Trapped is interesting. So, there is a potential story there that I quite like. One of the constant jokes of Warhammer is that Skaven don't exist. Yet, they're everywhere. And I do mean everywhere. As I sit here, just thinking about all the literature, they're everywhere. They're influencing all manner of events. They're at all levels of society. They're mixing with the human poor. They're mixing with the human rich. The number of individuals that are aware that Skaven exist is truly significant. Yet still, they somehow don't. And we can reinforce rather than undermine that. By example, having a rat man who's not a rat man. As I say, if you're going to introduce Skaven, you need to introduce at least 2 factions, if not 3, potentially 4. And one of our factions could be an Amber Wizard that's gone wrong. Could be an Amber Wizard who's hiding away, trying to find a way out of his current circumstances. Although why he would be here is really stupid. We need to have a very strong reason beyond just he used to live here or this used to be where she lived. We need to have a strong reason for why this Amber, this Gur Wizard gone wrong. Possibly it's a bit more old human magic. I don't know. There's a story here though that the Skaven themselves could have issues with, and you could have them being discovered, have the players expect that it's going to be Skaven, but it's not. Just doing another thing to undermine the idea that everything is Skaven. I don't think that's bad. Yeah, a beast form spell gone wrong type thing. Yeah, something like that. Clinicians sometimes hired by others to spy, right? Yeah, they totally are. But again, we'd need to have what they're spying for and who has hired them and who's going to be trying to stop them. If someone's been hired, if someone spent the warp tokens on hiring a Clanesian spy, they're rich, like really rich. And that means that they've got a strong reason for wanting some information that they themselves couldn't gather from a cheaper, looser alternative. Perhaps it's just fear of their minions being discovered because it'll all be above ground. Perhaps it's something else. Perhaps Clanation have offered them a particular deal, but we need to have a story if you're doing this. The Skaven have got such a rich background that doing a disservice to it is, as far as I'm concerned, a crime. Just having a bunch of Skaven who happen to be here doing X, Y, or Z is just not worth it. You'd be much better going, there's this faction of Skaven that want this. Because of that, this faction of Skaven who hate them want to stop them. So they're doing this. But now that they've arrived, they've found this and they want that. Build yourself an entire small faction map with probably at least 3 or 4 factions of Skaven and how they influence the city. And I'd say that ultimately that's probably the best way of doing it. Rather than thinking of an individual location, think of the Skaven that are involved, which clans are involved, how the clergy, for want of a better description, how the Grey Seers are influencing matters, and what is it they want from here, and how are the different push and pulls for that working. And then once you've done that, you can then say, well, this one will clearly be down here trying to do that. This one will be over here. This one will be over there. This one will be over there. They're all doing their own things. They're all trying to stop each other from doing each other's things, because there's a reason that the Skaven haven't wiped out the Empire, and it's not numbers. They have the numbers to do it. The reason is the Horned Rat. They're constantly at each other's throats. So if we're adding Skaven, they have to be constantly at each other's throats. The only way they are ever bound together is by the influence of Grey Seers, and even then, it doesn't work. Janice says, oh, well, this is my first experience of Warhammer. I have no clue what it is about. Well, that's interesting. You've done really well so far. I'm here because I like drawing maps at city scales and enjoying seeing your creating process. Oh, Janice, it's been an absolute delight having your extra ideas. And please don't stop. It's been really, really handy. The more ideas, the better. Martin says, we don't have a Rat Catchers Guild yet either. That's a good point. Maybe a good location. They'd be needed to keep any food warehouses clear. Yes, they would. And having them down in this part of town is not a bad idea. We're almost finished with our comments. I want to finish mapping this section. An Amber Wizard whose spell went south and ended up with them being trapped in a half man, I can't even say it, in a form between human and rat, came to the city to try to get in touch with the local elven delegation and get their help with getting around. I mean, why would you turn to elves? You'd have to be pretty freaking desperate to go to those haughty motherfuckers to be very sweet about it. The elves, I can just see how the elves would react to that, beyond laughter at ridiculous humans and their ridiculous attempts to do magic. Pride, I think, could be a strong motivation in that they don't want to go to their peers to show their own failure at doing what should be a relatively simple spell. So having them go to another support source, I mean, you could go for that angle, but would you go with elves? I wouldn't. It'd have to be someone who's got a pretty special headspace. I mean, the elves in Warhammer are a very arrogant group, particularly the High Elves. I'm not sure I'd want to turn to them, no matter how desperate I was. You'd probably want to go to another source. And if that's the case, who do you go to, and why is it local, and why is it here? And I think that is something that would need to be answered. There's lots of ways it could be answered. Illegal wizards, perhaps an old master, someone that they used to work with, perhaps someone who has been practicing older forms of human magic that are no longer accepted by the Empire. Perhaps it's something completely different. Perhaps they were being employed to infiltrate Skaven and it failed massively. The spell has gone wrong and now they're on the run. Perhaps someone who's responsible for that spell lives locally and they're trying to find them. But you need a good story to make this all work. Collapsed building here. Now, as I said, we're keeping all of our details pretty simple for these. Our blocks are simple, our coloring simple, our shapes are simple. That's again to make the map as readable as possible. And if you're interested in the techniques that we use for that, there's a complete tutorial for everything that I did for this over on the Rookery Discord, which I know I say quite a lot, but that's because I got messaged quite a bit from the first 5 or 6 videos from people who clearly watched some of it, but not all of them, because I think I mention it in every single video. So I do mention it relatively frequently in case someone happens to dabble into the video, watch 10 minutes, half an hour, 15 minutes of it, or something similar. I am purposely for this map only using the techniques I used in that tutorial. When I do maps professionally, like I did maps for, say, Critical Role or Chaosium or Games Workshop or anything similar, I would often use a variety of other techniques too. But I am keeping it super simple for this. It also makes the stream go a little bit faster. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of locations potentially building here. And it does beg the question, are any of these special locations? We've got the possibility of an apothecary. We've got some possibly some ruins or some equivalent for kids to be working from, a gang of kids. And we don't necessarily need to go all Oliver Twist with these, which is the classic stereotype. We could go somewhere different with those. We could have them influenced by an outside party that's not expected. Perhaps our Ratmen, again, our Skaven, working through a host of Baker Street irregular types. Kids that they could then easily infiltrate themselves. Kids who find it hard to find a Ratman as particularly bad guy-esque when it's the Ratman who's feeding them, taking care of them, fostering them. That could be one way of using the Skaven. Although if we did that, we'd have to be super careful because our kids could all end up dead at the hands of an assassin. We all know that the Ratmen do enjoy killing anything that gets in the way. After all, a dead problem can't rise up and cause you problems in the future. They are, as factions go, one of the most likely to turn lethal. Life is short for the Skaven, and they know it. Okay, I'm getting an idea of these this bits now. Let's just get my road here, connect it through to the back, connect that in there. Okay, a little bit down at the bottom, and then I'm going to probably stop doing lines and highlight and shade these areas so that we've got them filled in. And we can take a look and see how we've developed so far. We were going down that. Oh, no, we've not got much left. I'll do the whole area. Okay, cool. Right. Just go on my road layer again and just fill in that little section. Go over to the other one. Before I do that, I'll quickly check the comments in case there's anything else here. Yalab says, all right, scrap the elves then. How about hedge folk? I think we already have some hedge folk, don't we? Maybe. We have the boggy swamps next to Karpdorf. Could explain what they're there for. The right city, but the wrong swamp. Well, yeah, possibly. So they're looking for the hedge folk swamps. Well, hedge folk don't do shape shifting though, unless somebody's added a bunch of crazy spells that don't make sense. Hedge folk are very much about the liminal space between civilization and the wild, between the material world and the immaterial world. They walk like ghosts between one and the other. They don't live in the towns. They live in huts on the edge of town. They don't really shapeshift. That's not their thing. Their thing's more about communicating with spirits and placating the local spirits. So if it was hedge folk, we'd need to have a reason for why they thought that the hedge folk would be responsible and capable of helping them. SD then adds, quick question, do you remember correctly, was there a waystone somewhere in town? Which wind is it aligned to? We probably have the site of an old waystone under where the halflings are. It almost certainly isn't a waystone anymore, and it was tied to Gyron in particular. So that's the magical wind of life. Yalab says, yes, in the halfling colony, and it's Gyron. There we go. I didn't even need to say it. Somebody else did it for me. Yalab then says, oh yeah, we can have another grey wizard down here, but what would they be looking into? I'm not sure we need to have another one, but you get a good story, well up for that. Are they here to find the Skaven and get rid of them? Are they working for the Skaven for some reason? There could be something in that. Martin then says, rumors of rat like Beastman. Yes, quite. And Yalab then says, a Skaven spy using a web of children as an informant. A Game of Thrones Lord Varys style could be interesting, unusual take. Yeah, I agree. One of the things I like to do, and I think is worth gently discussing before I finish off this section, when we're creating locations, NPCs, cities, is to think of them as real places. And the second you do that, you start realizing that half of the stuff that we create is a bit silly and doesn't make a great deal of sense when you think about the day-to-day life that the people that are living in these locations have to deal with. And if you're a kid and you're being looked after by somebody who's giving you food, looking after you, you're not going to be sitting there worrying about what the local priest of Sigmar is saying about mutants or whatever. You're just going to be saying thanks very much. And they're going to be a really useful potential spy network for a Skaven. In the end, if you've got the spy career, which obviously Warhammer has, you've got yourself a ring of informants. And if you've decided you've got a Skaven career that's using it, who are their ring of informants? The classic take, if you're creating Skaven NPCs, is to say, well, they're cultists of the Yellow Fang, as in they are people who effectively worship Skaven. That's a little bit strong, but most certainly are enslaved to the Skaven in one way or another. And they are, just in the Skaven employ. Let's not think about it too much. Rather than trying to think of them as real people and what sort of people get caught up in the machinations of the Ratmen. So, trying to create situations that are different, interesting, potentially exciting, and use all of the cool stuff that's in the setting. That's where I think our best adventure hooks and our best NPCs will lie, rather than just doing yet another, if it's Warhammer, yet another state army officer, yet another watchman, yet another hedge wizard in many respects, because they've become almost hand in hand with what many people view as Warhammer, yet another witch hunter, yet another rat catcher. So it's nice to try and figure out characters that aren't necessarily what you'd expect, particularly if you've got Skaven who is actually rather, say, fond of their humans. I'm trying to think of Skaven and their society and how they manifest. That doesn't mean that they are incapable of all manner of different emotions. Just look at them squirt the musk of fear in the various novels and various other musks as well. And how can we best represent that with interesting characters? And many Skaven can speak Reichspiel. And if many Skaven can speak Reichspiel, that means they're speaking it with people. Why? What are they doing with it? Is this going to be, ultimately, when we get past all this, a part of my stream? The answer is yes. Absolutely. It is. When we play the game, the Skaven are important. They were always supposed to be important to the campaign. They are really important to our version of what we're presenting. Yellow Bad, as for do we need a grey wizard, we said very early on we probably want a couple of them across the city, and we have one so far. Yeah, that's fair. I did, because this is the centre of politics. Grey wizards are very interested in Warhammer in politics. Many of them stand as diplomats or provide advisorial help to various noble bloodlines. They are often called in when there are difficult problems that need to be resolved between two competing parties. They're known for being wise, they're known for being well-traveled, and they're known for being collectors of lore. And this ties through as well to a lot of their iconography. They carry swords because the symbol of the order is a sword, the sword of judgment of Verena in many respects. They stand as part of the same iconography, if you will, as Verena. A lot of the gods tie through to the winds of magic in ways that aren't immediately obvious. And this is something that's often discussed behind the scenes when we're creating material and trying to come up with new, interesting, exciting ways to appreciate the material. But you'll find that sometimes it's dropped into the books. The Tome of Salvation has got a little bit about the Sword of Judgment and Ulgu as well. But yeah, definitely think that makes sense. I quite like the idea of adding that in. Yalab then says, doesn't necessarily need to be here. We don't need to stick with an idea in general, but if we want, this seems like a good area. I agree. It does, because it's a place. I mean, this place is going to be less full of intrigue. Grey wizards are attracted to Ulgu. That's the grey wind of magic in Warhammer. And the grey wind of magic in Warhammer is attracted to intrigue, but it's also attracted to mist and hanging mist and places of secrecy. And I think that could very well be our boggish area. If we have a sort of low-hanging har, a mist that gathers there on certain nights, that would be a natural collection of Ulgu, potentially a collection that could turn sour. The winds of magic in Warhammer can turn sour and turn into dar. That's black magic if they're left to go stagnant. And marshes without that free flow could very well do that, although it's more likely that Gyron, the wind of life, would go stagnant there. Yanis then says, and those kids grow up, get work, extend the network. The kids are taught and have options on better jobs. See, that's good. I'll say why I think this is good. We're considering having this group of kids tied to a Skaven who is using them to gather information. And if we make this multi-generational, we can have ourselves some adults that are running through the city that are underneath, not necessarily the control, but most certainly the aegis of a Ratman, their old patron. There is a slight problem here, and that's that Skaven are relatively short-lived. They normally don't live more than about 20, 30 years. Truth be told, most of them don't last more than about 5 years because their society can be so cutthroat. But it's not impossible that they'd live for a good hoary old age, but it's rare. But there's all manner of ways around that with the Skaven. That's generally those who are in power. They use magic, effectively, warpstone, to extend their lives significantly. Think of warpstone and how the Skaven use it with its refinement, a little bit similar to spice in Dune, in that it's got geriatric properties. It can be used to extend life. Many Grey Seers are hundreds of years old, and the Council of 13, the leaders of the Skaven, are super old. Many of them were around hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So we can have ourselves potentially a relatively strong figure who's been coming in and out ever since this place turned from being a small village with a fort beside it into potentially a center of politics for the Reikland. And that means that we can have ourselves at least one shady figure as a shadowy patron for what starts off as a bunch of kids and then leads on to adults that individual patron will use their agents to try and infiltrate into better parts of town. So I can see, for example, that some of the serving folk for some of the more important bloodlines that work here, they may once have been street rats in their past. And I think street rats is most certainly the name we should probably use, given that this is Skaven and they're ratmen. So the ratmen are tied to the street rats. Like it. Martin says, Gothran's terriers, local rat catchers, avid dog breeders. They're small, vicious dogs, are noted for being exceptionally powerful swimmers due to their webbed paws. I'm not sure we need to necessarily make them webbed, although you might just be saying, are you saying that the Gothran's terriers are the name of the terrier or the name of the rat catchers? I ask because we already have a whole host of various terriers made in our dog supplement that I made. I can't believe I made a dog supplement, but I did. I made a dog supplement, and it's actually getting used by our party because one of our parties is a rat catcher in the game we're going to be playing, and yeah, she's pretty freaking cool. She's got a dog called Meat Pie, who's a Nordland Terrier. But let's get by this by. I like that in general, by the way. I'm not dissing the idea. I think it's a good idea, Martin. Nice one. Yalabs then says, I'm going back to the hedges in the north. I guess that they weren't full-blown hedges exactly. I have them noted as cunning folk, whatever the difference is exactly. They are still full-blown hedge folk. The cunning folk are just the Middenland equivalent. And they would have been sitting on that liminal space, to use that overused form, between civilization and the wild. And that has been crunched down into nothingness. And now they're just living in a hut that used to be on the edge of the village. And they're now living in a hut that's in the center of the town, but haven't moved out. If they were going to move out correctly, they should get the heck out of the city walls. Yalab then says, just maybe I didn't. Martin has Guthron. It's a grizzled veteran with an outlander's accent, a traveler from the snow-wreathed mountains of Norska. Few would suspect his skin-walking heritage. Yeah, we pulled on, in Warhammer, the Norskins. They're the equivalent of like Vikings from the north. And in Warhammer, our Vikings, our Norskins, are closely attached to skin changing, and their skin changes have appeared in different ways. It's often effectively werewolves, but they often break out of their skin, and they literally have their skin slewing off them in the most disgusting fashion. The classic werewolf of the past has become very much an old version of Warhammer and got changed. Games Workshop actually released some models for those skin changes. They're pretty freaking cool. Yeah, they came from Forge World. They're pretty awesome. But I think that having something like that's not a bad idea. We did do the same, though, down in Ubersreich, where one of the NPCs was a werewolf. I would be more interested in not going for the obvious one and perhaps doing something a bit different. For example, we could go for Guthron, the grizzled veteran, is exactly what everyone fears and never expects, and that's that he's possibly a chaos worshipper. One big difference between the north and the south is in Norska, the chaos gods are very real. They're on the edges of the chaos wastes, and worshipping those gods makes sense. They have a whole variety of ways of doing so to ensure that they don't attract the ire of the chaos gods. They've got their Victi shamans, effectively, who speak to the gods on their behalf. And sometimes that includes the chaos gods. But they mix the pantheons, at least in my version. Different versions of Warhammer have done it in different ways. But I'm still very much caught up with the second edition version of how it's presented. And they mix the pantheons of the normal old world, say Ulrich, the god of winter and war, with the gods that are literally evil as far as the empire is concerned. And they don't see that as an issue. Indeed, many of them are fallen to chaos, but they're not really. They just worship chaos on a day-to-day basis. So we could have somebody who is perhaps a genuine observer to chaos without actually be fallen to chaos as an occultist, a different version for how that's presented. Somebody who has observances to, say, Char. Char is the Norscan version, one of the Norscan versions of Tzeentch, the chaos god of change. So we could have him be a Char, if not worshipper per se, but most certainly somebody who makes observances to Char to make sure that the god of change doesn't penalize him and does potentially support him. And we could again have those issues with his version of Tzeentch worship bouncing off against the local incursion of the Purple Hand or whatever we decide to do with Tzeentch cultists. So that's just one thing we could do. I'm not saying this is a good idea, just went off on one. That could work, though. Multi-generational may not fit with our overall story as part of the city's at best 20 years old. Yeah, I think even 20 years is multi-generational because, 20 years ago, a kid of 10, 20 years later is now 30 or 40. So if we've got the story starting maybe 25 years ago when interest is first discovered, totally fits. I think we could make that work. Martin says, I did make a suggestion that the engineer is a Skaven collaborator. She was disenfranchised by numerous dead ends in the male-dominated colleges, was captured by Skaven en route to Tilia, and became enamored by their crazy mechanical contraptions. I find that a difficult story to support with the secretive nature of the way the Skaven are. Becoming enamored with their crazy mechanical contraptions would involve her being, well, right down in the Under Empire and most don't survive that. And how on earth would you get out? We would need to have one hell of a story to justify that. I'm not saying that's impossible. It's totally possible. We can come up with a really cool story. Just saying you'd need a really good story. And the character would effectively be a slave, because Skaven do not treat people well. And if that's the case, why is there a slave out here? What's it doing? Goat person says, Fagin the Skaven. I got visions of a singing clan rats dancing through my mind. Yal says, I'm still waiting for Andy Lloyd's guide to falconry. I almost started that about 4 weeks ago, but I have too much on my plate. But I was literally that close. I was like, I could just spend my afternoon doing this. I need to clear my head because I've gone down a squirrely hole I need to get out of. Let's write falcons, because most of the material that I wrote for Modern Fantasy Roleplay for dogs, for horses, for cats, they were created very, very quickly, like in an afternoon, because I just needed to clear my head. And I almost was that close. Yallo then finishes off with the guy who started setting who's a werewolf was an Orcan, though, right? Yeah, he was. Absolutely was. Which is why I was going in a slightly different direction to try and mix it up. But he was Norscan, as I recall. Wasn't he? Yeah, he was. He was. He was, I think. Right, let's get this finished, because we need to get this section finished. We've done far too much talking. We haven't really added any extra detail, but we have added a lot of cool story points to our city, right? So I'm wanting to have this part here to be sort of collapsed and broken up. I want this part here a bit more regimented, and this part here to be just a mess. Okay, so I'm going to start over with the mess area. I'm just going to pop in some loose lines first that I'm going to then connect together to make sense of. This is a section of buildings, some of which are in their original state, some of which have broken roofs, some of which have collapsed in others, some of which are all connected together. But most certainly not a good part of town. This place does not smell good. This is probably, when we mentioned earlier in the stream, a section of town where they're living on what used to be the first floor as their ground floor. For you Americans out there, I am indeed using British or European, depending on how you wish to define it. Terminology for floors, that is, we have the ground floor, and then the first floor is the floor above the ground floor. It's the first floor up, where often our American friends will be saying that the first floor is the ground floor, and then the second floor is the first floor above that. But yeah, I think a lot of these buildings are sunk. They're at slightly funny angles. And people have built up around and over them. Some of them have been used as foundations to build newer buildings on top of. And many of them are probably very poorly constructed. As one is aware, if you know your Warhammer lore, the dwarf word for humans is umgi, which basically means shoddily made. And it's not just because they think humans are shoddily made, it's because they think that everything that humans build is pretty poor quality and is unlikely to last for more than a single human lifetime, indeed. Where a dwarf life is significantly longer, they are unimpressed with how humans do their stuff. And I think this is a shining example of everything that the dwarves expect from humanity. It's a bit of a mess. Okay, let's go quickly check comments before I go on. Starter set says the Tin Spur says yellow. Uber's right, page 53 has 2 new attractions. They're Drawing Mass Clouds, the Snow White Wolf Hound named Icefang. Yeah, that's right. And the tall Middenlander with piercing blue eyes named Reikland. Gestalten Stark. Yeah, of course. He's a Middenlander. He's an anti-Sigmarite Ulrican from Middenland. I don't see any mention of Norscan in that section. He's not. He's a child of Ulric. You're absolutely right. For those of you who don't know, Ulrich is the Warhammer god of winter, war, and wolves. And Ulrich is also one of the few gods who apparently has broken the diktat of the other gods and actually walks the old world. Now, there's a few of them that do this. At various points in Warhammer lore, there are mentions of gods who don't do the god thing that Warhammer is known for, and that's that they actually come down and are on the mortal plane. The most famous example is probably Myrmidia, the goddess of strategy and warfare, and old goddess of strategy for, civilization for Tilia and Stalia. She, approximately 300, manifested in the real world as a mortal. It did not go well for her at all. She realized that mortals were really horrible people. And she cast aside her original remit of being about civilization and turned into a goddess of war and tried to bring what she believed to be proper civilization to humanity and the mess that it was. She, though, was assassinated by Skaven in the end and returned to the realm of the gods after she had conquered almost all of modern-day Tilia and Estalia. But other gods walk the world. We could say, for example, discuss Ladriel, the elven god. She literally wanders the old world, traveling from one place to the next, the Mistwalker. We could discuss even the more obvious ones who have literal avatars, as in physical mortal reflections of themselves, like Ariel and Orion, the king and queen of the wood. They are pretty much gods, although mortal versions of them. I have a complete description for how that works in my game world. A lot of Warhammer players don't think about that too much, largely because the Wood Elves are so far removed from most of their games that they don't need to really worry about exactly who is Orion, Ariel, how do they get their powers, are they gods, are they not gods, how does this manifest? Do they want to match what happened with the End Times material, where gods started walking the Warhammer world there too? But yeah, Ulrich is one of those who apparently still kind of kicks around. And the children of Ulrich, many of them actually believe they are the literal children of Ulrich, the sons of Ulrich, descended directly from a god. If you believe such talk, make this one a bit bigger. Right, so it feels like a location almost. Almost there. Let's get our main buildings on the square here. Have a couple of ruins off towards this side, since we didn't ruin much of this shanty town there. Something that's collapsed entirely at the end of this street. Beside buildings that are not quite so ramshackle. Okay, so we're almost finished this area. It took a little bit longer than expected because we sat and chatted for a bit, but I think it was good chat. It's not entirely unknown for this stream to have long chats about different aspects of how this world... Whoa, why aren't you deleting? There we go. For those of you who know your Wacom products, when you turn your pen round, like so, the other end is an eraser, much like an old pencil with a rubber eraser on the other side. And it wasn't erasing there. I was turning it over and it was drawing just like it was a drawing side, and that was very weird. Okay, we're almost there. I'm going to make chunks of this part, I think, wasteland. Parts of this have been repurposed to move over to our shanty town, which hasn't quite made its way all the way up here. As I've said a few times, it's quite important to remember that no place is fully built up, even in the most close of towns. There are areas that have collapsed into wasteland almost in every single city, often for reasons involving local politics because they haven't decided what to build in a particular area, or whether it should be built, or who has the rights to build there, or whatever it might be. So it's always good to ensure that there's some areas of wasteland. I did this similarly for, say, for example, the Whitestone. I think it was Whitestone, the Whitestone map for Critical Role. The Whitestone. A wee while ago that I did that one now. Let me just quickly check that. For Critical Role, because that city was expanding significantly. I'll go to the Critical Role fandoms one because it's got, I'll almost certainly have a map there of it. Let me just double check. Yeah, there it is. It's at the bottom of that one. I'll put a link up for you if you want to have a look at that one. Darrington Press's version of it. Where's my streamy bit? So I can post the comment. There it is. I'll just drop that in as a roll. And that's Whitestone. And I had quite a lot of free reign to build that as needed. Obviously, I was taking notes from the Critical Role players for their actual play stream because they'd made some significant changes to that location from when I first mapped it around about 10 years ago. And I, because they were expanding out fast, again, made that suggestion. Make sure that we've got areas that are not yet fully built. If we're expanding outwards, we've got city walls. There's going to be parts that are half built or didn't have enough money for one reason. They're like, yeah, that sounds great. So I did that down in one part of it. That map was done really quite quickly, actually. Tight deadlines in those because there was a lot of maps for that book. Fun book, by the way, if you want to go check out a completely different style of world to the majority of, say, Warhammer worlds are presented. Critical Role has a very, very different feel, and I quite enjoy it for that. Right, okay, it looks like we've mapped all of this. Unbelievably, we have. Great, let's start coloring this in. I'll check the comments first. And then after I've checked the comments, I'm just going to pile in. We've got some locations that we need to mark in here. If there's a particular location you think we should mark, we definitely have the apothecary. We need to have somewhere that our kids are working from, which might be some of the wasteland areas that we've just added here. Do we have any other locations that we definitely want marked here as a purple location? If so, please drop in as a comment. I think we really only have mentioned our fountain, our kids. I'm really liking the idea of all the washing. In fact, I'm half tempted, like the washing all piling up and stringing off in the buildings there. I think that makes for a really characterful description for that square. Yeah, so if you've got anything that you think I need to add in there, because I'd really like maybe at least 2, 3. I'm going to have 3 purple locations. That's not too bad. Is that enough? If we think it's enough, we'll just move on. Anyway, comments. Going back to things at hand, we're at the Marienburg Gang. Marienburg Gang, of course, that's going to be our next obvious thing to place down in here. Perhaps even their main spot. What special criminal thing could they have going for them? I think that's a really good question. We've got ourselves a gang from Marienburg. Marienburg are Warhammer's equivalent to the Dutch. And it's not just the Dutch, it's all the Low Countries and a whole host of other bits as a great melange. And they are, as far as the Empire is concerned, a state in rebellion. And they are particularly known for being ruthless businessmen. And their ruling classes are merchant houses. And their gangs are almost certainly going to be attached and affiliated with some of those merchant houses as well, because they'll just get paid to undermine local business. So perhaps that's some of the angle that we could take here, that not only are they attempting to form a corner for themselves in the city with their own criminal activities, they're also being paid to undermine local businesses that perhaps stand as competition to Marienburg house businesses. So that could be an angle that we have, something that gives them at least a slightly different spin. But I think we could do with maybe more than just that alone. Yalb says, of course, usual racketeer. Yeah, indeed. It's something on top of it. I agree, Yalb. Yalb then adds, I'm thinking maybe usury. PCs tend to be in need of money, and taking a bit of debt never ended up going badly. Can't go wrong with a bit of usury. Martin says, maybe an area that's recently burnt down. Rumors are growing that it's those bright folk up in the fort. I think that possibly we do want that, but in a different slum. We've got another slum land, which we're going to have over here. in this section, and you might see the word slum sitting, and I think that would work really well there. Having a burnt out section, that also means that we can do something really crazy, like call it like the Little East End or something like that. Get the Klein East End or something nonsensey like that, so that we can give that idea of how some of the things that have happened in Altdorf have also happened here. In my version of Altdorf, at least, that's the capital city of the empire. The bright colleges of magic, where all the pyromancers are, is over in the east end of the city, between the confluence of the rivers Talbeck and Reik. It'd been there pretty much forever until the most recent book decided they were going to drop all the colleges together, which I am not doing for my version of Altdorf. My version of Altdorf will have the bright college where it always was, and as far as I'm concerned, it still is, over in the east end of the city. And we could do something similar here, where the east end has been, unfortunately, damaged by their activities. Martin then says, Marienburg gang, counterfeiting, clipping, undermining local coinage. Possibly, yes, all of those things. Yeah, Janice says, those spy kids, would there be a school? Now, in Warhammer, there is an attempt at universal education. They're not quite reached that point yet, and that's certainly not a legal mandate. But there's a goddess, the goddess of wisdom called Verena, who is very much interested in going out and trying to gather orphans together to educate them. And we already have up here, I go up here, there it is, an orphanage, which is run by Verenans. They were going to get an enormous temple, which is up there, but they instead funneled the funds down to building an orphanage. It's got a little track sitting at the back of it here, where they have the kids run around. They've got a tiny little midden ball field, is a super small one, by the way, for the kids. And they most certainly would be sending down the equivalent of missionaries coming down here and trying to get the kids to get a proper education. That is something that I think that the Skaven master of them would see as a threat or potentially an advantage, in that you could infiltrate the local orphanage. I think that there's different stories we could tell with this, but I think if they're getting taught, it's almost certainly up here in the orphanage. That doesn't mean that they're living there. Perhaps they don't want to live there. Perhaps there's reasons that they don't. But our spy kids, I think at least a few of them might be getting educated up there, which means our spy kids might be unexpectedly educated. And I say unexpectedly because the Warhammer world is generally perceived to be this sort of pseudo-medieval, stroke Renaissance, stroke strangely Victorian, depending on which part of the society you look at, civilization. And that often comes hand in hand with this standard belief that the vast majority of the populace is illiterate. But this is also a world that's a proper polytheistic society. And one of the goddesses in particular is absolutely entrenchantly behind ensuring that everyone can read and write in at least some capacity. And anywhere with the cult of Verena and the cult of Verena's clergy can be found, you're going to find that kids are often far more educated than you would normally expect if you're trying to think of this as a real world equivalent. So we can have our kids having access to a relatively decent education. They probably know the basics of arithmetic, philosophy. They're probably quite aware of the basic theological concerns of the day, and they almost certainly can read and write. And I think that would be used by the Skaven. They will be quite willing to send their kids off to get a proper education so that they are better spies. They are more useful to the Ratman. Quite like that as an idea. Yalab says the fountain could have a statue of someone important. Yes, we did suggest that already, but the locals don't particularly care and have a web of laundry lines spanning from the buildings tied to its head. Yeah, I think that something like that is a good idea, particularly because it gives you the disrespect for big statues is a thing that is almost universal. Whether you go to Glasgow and they're always putting cones on top of heads, or if you think of some of the statues in Edinburgh, where some people to this day, even though the people they depict might be like there's one chapel, I was about to call it a shrine. There's one chapel where people still go in there and will swear at this chapel because of who it represents in terms of the old Scottish clans. I won't go into details there, but 400 years is still not long enough for some people. So I think definitely something tied to that. And I think that he is a figure, potentially a pilloried figure who is not well liked. And there's a story that we'll need to create there. Martin says, purple location. I'm not sure what you're saying that for. I presume there's something. Yalib says, probably not a school in the slums. We have a school and orphanage for the children run by the Brenians slightly to the north. Yes, we do. And I think I discussed that in full. Martin then says, maybe they've escaped, proffering their freedom. A priestess tried to round them up, priest or priestess. Yeah, possibly some of them have escaped, although I don't think escaped is necessarily the case. I think a better way around will be having the Skaven using what is effectively free services that they offer, and the Vrenans being in a position where they're not going to turn it down. They are behind universal education, and if they can get some more kids into their classrooms, they're probably going to take it. That's obviously a vast simplification of how it's set up. I definitely think there's something there. Esty says, regarding the Skaven seeing the Vrenans as a threat or not, why not both? The master himself may see it as a positive, while the rival clan sees it as a threat against their own plans. Yeah, I think that's possibly a very good line, Esty. Esty then also adds, and their political arguments could be that it might reveal their presence. Yes, it might, and it might reveal their influence on the kids. And I think that there's definitely something in that. Then Martin finished off. So purple locations, fountain, yes. Apothecary, circle with a square with circle in it. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's go for that. Ratcatchers Guild, south of the square L shape. Okay, south of the square L shape. Not sure which one that one is. I'll get to that one in a second. Kids hideout, small area and cluster of buildings to the far east. Yeah, I think somewhere over there is a good idea. So let's mark our purple locations now, because that's exactly what I was about to do. So let's go locations. We've got our fountain. So let's do that first. I'm going to change my brush so I can color this in a little bit more easily. Okay, so our fountain is one. Much like the last fountain, I'm going to leave the water a blue color, just because that's a little bit nicer. We have our apothecary, and I think you were suggesting this one, and I think that it is a standout location, so let's do that one. The next one was the Ratcatchers Guild. Do you think Ratcatchers over here is not a bad idea? Although you do have to consider that the Ratcatchers Guild has to be somewhere where they are relatively approachable, which means that they don't want to be in the worst part of town. So you suggested south of the square L shape. So the square L shape. There's a square-ish L shape there. That's sort of upside down. I don't think you mean that one. I'm not sure what you mean. Would you like to add a little bit more detail to that? Kids hideout, small area and cluster of buildings to the far east. I actually think I prefer the kids hideout to be up amongst what is going to be relatively broken land in ruins here. That gives them area to play around with at the back. I think I prefer them there, although our locations are a bit close. That being the case, I'm going to move the apothecary. And I'm going to move it somewhere that's going to be further away from the rest of them, but still, let's move it. I want it sort of down here. Let's see if you've got an L-shaped things that's better first. For the Marienburgers, in my opinion, medium, large building doesn't particularly matter where. Yeah, I agree. It doesn't particularly matter where, but we do want medium, large. I think possibly the Marienburgers, they've taken over down here, and they've taken over possibly the entire block, including the ruin that's attached to it. And they've kicked some other folks out for an adventure hook for someone wanting their place back that they probably don't deserve, and it wasn't theirs anyway. It was probably bought from them, and they're trying to pretend it wasn't. So we have the entire place taken over by them. That also gives that sensation of scale for them, which I quite like. Martin says, lol, I'm pointing at the screen. Yeah, I've done that. I'm sitting there saying, that bit over there, and I realize you have literally no idea what I'm pointing at. And I think Martin meant the building that is L-shaped, rotated about 110 degrees, located in the south of the large plaza with the fountain. So you mean this one here, I presume. That's not a bad place. That would be for it's a pretty... I'm just thinking of people coming in from this part of town, making their way down. We're moving past the wall, so you first have to make a psychological step as you move away from what feels like the safety of that side to the lack of safety as you move on to the slum side. And our middle-class folks, who are going to be some of the most prominent rat-catching requirers, are going to be... They're going to need to feel relatively safe for the guild building unless they go and tout their services in a square elsewhere. So we could have a guild hall It doesn't feel like a guild hall. It feels more like a little guild house. I still quite like it there, though. No, I'm going to go with it. Possibly it was once a smithy or something else. Quite like that. Let's pop it there. Okay, so that leaves us with a location for the apothecary. I'm less keen. I'm even less. Yeah, I mean, really, the apothecary wants to be over here for the best distribution. We could have a standalone apothecary like that. We could have an even bigger one that's looking out into the square. We could have it as part of one of the buildings here. So it's down on the bottom floor with residences above it. I think that's what I'm going to go for. So we can have a shop that's actually part of an established tenement. And we'll just mark it off like so. Okay, that's probably a better idea. We'll probably end up with another Rat Catchers Guild in the north. No, if there's a guild, there will be one. That's it. You don't get multiple guilds inside the city. You get a single guild, but it might have multiple offices. But there will be a single guild. There might be several people who are part of that guild, but there'll still only be a guild. As I don't think anyone from the good part of the city is coming there. I agree, no one's coming here. So we'll need to have some form of representation elsewhere. But it might just be that they send their servants, or alternatively, someone stands with a rat pole out in one of the main squares. So perhaps one of the apprentices is always out there with a big rat pole with dead hats hanging off it, touting the services like a hawker up in a main square, and they'll do their business from there, and then they come down into the south where they actually run their offices from. I think that'll probably work. SD adds, regarding approaching the rat catchers, maybe they have a very small office elsewhere where the richer folks feel comfortable approaching them. And this is where they actually are most of the time. I think I agree with them being here most of the time. I'm less keen with building a second office, because if they could afford to build a second office elsewhere, they would probably move, because this isn't the best part of town. And if it was a tiny office even, they would probably move. There's probably not that many rat catchers. 15,000 folks. And they're going to have a constant vermin issue that constantly needs, maybe. We'll worry about that when we make the location. I think probably Hawking will do. Martin says, the well-to-do have servants to go and make deals. Yes, they do. I agree with that. And Yal then adds, I think I blacked out for a second. What's the purple location? In the middle of the large tenement. That's the apothecary. Keyword small, says Esty. Yeah, I'm not sure they'd want to pay for it if they've already got an office. Again, though, I'm quite happy to, as in, oh man, now we could turn it from, if it fits one man, you could turn it to the equivalent of what would be like a TARDIS. We used that type of idea as police boxes, for want of a better description, for the watch in Ubersreich, where they had small booths. We could do something like that. They were used as lockups, where they would lock up criminals just inside the small booth. And we could do something similar here, where there's a small booth up off one of the main squares, and they basically run a small business from that. One of the apprentices take jobs and then take those jobs back to the guild, and those jobs are then disseminated amongst the rat catchers that are associated with their guild. That would probably do quite well. I actually quite like that. That means we can also have a fun little building, perhaps attached to a building. There's perhaps some trouble with the rent involved with it. Perhaps it's extortionate, or perhaps the person that actually owns it wants to kick the rat catchers out because he doesn't see them as appropriate. There's lots of different ways that we can make that potentially interesting. An old toll booth, as in here, or do you mean an old toll booth for the rat catchers? I think it'd work quite well for the rat catchers, but toll booths are generally, of all things, there was a gallery where I used to live up in Thurso, the very north of Scotland. And it was called the Old Toll Booth Gallery, because a lot of the toll booths were actually quite large, because they were used for a variety of purposes beyond just a simple taking a toll. So I'm not sure it would fit a tiny section, unless we were saying that there was a tiny toll booth there, which we could potentially do as well. Yeah, then says Ratcash and Ubersreich are stated to number 9 people. Yeah, and I'm not convinced that there was actually enough inside that guild. We had a discussion about it afterwards, but there was a reason that we went for 9. It was because of the associations that we were creating between the Rat Catchers Guild in Ubersreich and bluntly Fat Shark, who made the Vermintide game. The idea of the Rat Catchers Guild being effectively populated by the people that created the Vermintide computer game was too much of an amusing thing for us to avoid. But we did that for a reason. It's because when we were creating the Ubersreich book, I got in contact with Fat Shark, and they were just the loveliest. They gave me a version of Ubersreich that I could fly around. They gave me all the codes so that I could literally fly through Ubersreich and everything that they created for it. And it was fascinating to work down the channels that they created everything for, because your characters would run down those individual channels and the sections of Ubersreich that just pretty much didn't exist. But it was because of that flyover that we could make sure that our version of the Ubersreich bridge completely matched their version of the Ubersreich bridge that they had in the video game. So as a way of saying thanks, we wrote them directly into the setting. And that included everyone we talked to, right up to their CEO. They were literally the best. If you haven't played Vermintide and you want to see what a Skaven Warhammer game could be like, certainly worth a go. It's a proper mental game. Love it. Yalb says, and that place has extensive sewers. I agree, and I still think the numbers are way too low. But we could argue that the rat catchers are separate to the sewer jacks, and then it's no longer a sewer issue. It's the sewer jacks will be dealing with that. So we're probably looking at an even smaller number here. I actually think we probably have a higher number if you consider the potential infestation of rats that this place is going to have and how much work would be involved. You just have to break it down to how many people are going to be needed to go from place to place to place to place to do their jobs. You don't, after all, require a sewer to have a rat. The rats get literally everywhere. Just take a look at some of those horrible rat videos that you get online for the infestations. They're often mice, actually, over in the Australian farms. It's horrendous, and no sewers there at all worth mentioning. They just live everywhere, and it's horrible. And those sorts of infestations are almost impossible to remove. In a town this size, wouldn't you just ask a rat catcher as they go about their business? You say this size, it's actually quite a big place. To our modern eyes, perhaps 15,000 isn't that big, but it's still pretty big. Finding someone going about their business is going to be a tall order under most circumstances. I'm still not convinced how many we need. I just think I think about the business and the extermination business. 15,000. How many of them are going to be going? I'm going to have a think on that. If anyone can actually find any numbers for this would be great. For the rat catchers, says Janice, and I'm not sure what you were asking about there. Are you asking about the number of the rat catchers? Not quite sure there. Esty says, I don't think no sewers necessarily means fewer rats. Yeah, I agree with that, actually. Martin says, rats don't need sewers to multiply. That's true. It's just the convenient space in cities and more rural locations. Farmyards with no sewer access are rife, and they absolutely are. Where I grew up, at the very north of Scotland, there was many a farm, and one of them, I recall, had a rat problem by the cow sheds, and they thought it was a rat problem in that there was a few hundred. Turned out there was an awful lot more than a few hundred. It's just that they are very good at hiding themselves. And the absolute worst. That was enough that it managed to hit the local newspaper when I was a kid, because they had to hire in exterminators, and they hired in a lot of them. It was a thing. Martin says, I would have thought about 20 with kennels for many dogs. Yeah. Especially because you've got to remember the exterminator part of the career also has a large and vicious dog, not just small ones. So you've got dogs of different sizes. And that rat catchers are often employed to not just deal with rat issues, but to deal with any infestations that people might find. And because they're used to, particularly the guilds, rather than the kids who might be just doing ratting as an apprenticeship type thing. So they're just catching rats and claiming the bounty of a pfennig for getting their rat's tails and then passing it into the local burgomeister's office or some equivalent. The professional rat killers are used to facing off against creatures. And you've got to remember, in the warmer world, not all rats are this big. Some of them are really fucking big. And if you're dealing with giant rats, you're literally dealing with what is the equivalent of a monster, and you're having to stab the fucker. They're pretty nasty. That's when you need a large and vicious dog, not a small but vicious dog, because you're not dealing with just the normal rats. So they're quite used to dealing with potentially larger things. So if there's any sort of creature that needs to be killed, pushed away, or equivalent, it's often the rat catchers that will be the first line that's approached. And if it's too much for them, it's then a matter of calling in the state army or approaching the local duke and saying, really, we have a problem. Can you resolve that? And then him saying, fix it yourself. Because, you know, nobles have a responsibility to their people. Martin says, yeah, don't check out the rat calling videos on YouTube. I stumbled across them with my rat. Yeah, I don't recommend it. It's actually awful. Yalb says, I get the argument that Uber's has a deflated number due to external things, so I guess larger number makes sense, but at least there it's directly said that they do also overwatch the sewers. Yeah, I think it does say that's because we wanted to get them down in the sewers, just like Vermintide. Indeed, that's what the piece of art we did. The piece of art that's in there, we got Sam Manley, the artist. He did a picture of 4 of their staff down there beating living crap out of Skaven because that was just too cool not to do. Yeah, I did enjoy that one. Mine says that's 20 lakh across age range. So some elderly, some young apprentices also recuperating from infections and injuries. Yeah, I think we'll probably look at Uber's Reich. I can justify in a variety of ways, and if I need to, I can write in why it's weird and small. But here we're probably looking at a guild master. We're probably looking at 5 to maybe 9 to justify the other one. Numbers loosely 5 to 9 full-time rat catchers that are working for them, and a larger number of apprentices that are just doing small ratting duty across the city and monitoring traps and being sent out to catch what the rat catchers themselves are dealing with. So I reckon we can have quite a number. We don't necessarily need to fix that number. But yeah, we're getting too caught up with our rat catchers here. Let's go on with finishing off the rest of these buildings, because I'm very keen to get this bit finished. We have managed to warble on for ages about this one. Let's... Ooh, there's a little bit of wall there to get rid of the colour on. There we go. And again, the same techniques as before. We're keeping this super simple. All of our buildings will be one color. All of our special locations another color. So our special locations stand out and we can immediately see them. That's important. But it's also so that all of our buildings are very clearly buildings, habitable locations for various NPCs that you might have inside your game. We could, of course, make these all lots of different colors with, I don't know, wooden roofs or slate, or alternatively terracotta tiles. But if we do that, all the buildings sort of turn into a hodgepodge jigsaw piece on the map, and it suddenly becomes difficult to do 2 things. 1, identify where the special locations are that you're looking for, those key locations that we're going to be writing up. And 2, actually scan the map. Sometimes with lots of different colors, it looks really pretty as an artistic piece, but it loses its functionality as a map, as something that you can, as a player or as a GM, or as whoever else is using this map, look at and go, this is what this is what that is, and very quickly get the information during play. So if you're playing your role-playing game at your table, often that map might be sitting in front of someone else or a little bit distant, and you want to be able to immediately spot all of the key details. You can create something more artistic that doesn't do that, and I'm all for that for certain maps, but for what we're doing here, yeah, nah. Let's go with the old tried and tested 2-color option. Although strictly speaking, we don't have a 2-color option. We actually have a 3-color option because we also have yellow for the walls. When we finish the map, we can then look at it all and decide if we want to change any of the colors, because the color that we have our buildings is set by a layer, as I discussed in the tutorial, meaning that at any point I can just go in and say, you know what, I actually want it to be a completely different color. I want it to be green. I want it to be blue. I want it to be orange. I can just change the color on my whim. I can make all the buildings a completely different color, just like that. I can do that to the special locations. I can do that with the wall. Super easy. And you can decide that at the end. One thing you can do, for example, is support the local heraldry. If our heraldry is purple and white, we can use purple and white for our building colors if we wish to do so, although white rarely makes a good color. It's because it's not really a color. If we wanted to support the game that we're playing, you could do the whole Warhammer and go red and yellow. Where red might be your standard buildings, you probably go for a slightly terracotta-esque red, and then possibly you go for a nice yellow color, a golden color. So mark all of our locations in gold. One thing I wanted to do for one of the maps was almost exactly that, and have all of the special locations marked in a distressed gold leaf, so that they had a really nice gold leafy finish, which would have looked well funky. I'm going to quickly save this, although I've got a feeling I'm online. This one's saved in the cloud, so I don't actually need to press save for this one, I think. It'll just save itself automatically in the background all the time. If you use Photoshop, by the way, I don't necessarily recommend using your documents saved by the cloud. There's a reason that I don't necessarily recommend that, and that's because I tend to sometimes not like what I've done and just reopen my document from scratch and ignore what I may have done for the last 5-10 minutes and just try something else different. Can't do that with a cloud saved document because it constantly saves over itself, and I keep on forgetting that, meaning that instead of Control Zing my way out of the mess that I might have created that I don't like, I just close the document, open it back up, and find that the very document I've just been working on looks identical to the one I just shut, because it just saved in the cloud. Very annoying. Modern day problems. That's like a leany tower there. First world problems, I suppose. Okay, when I've done all the color for these sections, I will check the comments, see if there's anything that we might want to change, if anyone said anything that involves a change. For some reason, Photoshop's running very slowly for me, so I'm actually going to take a pause here to do the comments. And I'm going to close off Photoshop for a second. So, excuse me while I go full scale. Oh, look at me. I'm going to close off Photoshop and just check it's not some sort of weird memory thing and just restart it. So, give me a second. While I close that down, check up the comments. Okay, so where were we? I kind of like the contrast between this area, a lot of buildings, not that many purple locations, and the one across the old wall, less dense infrastructure, many more important locations. Yeah, I agree. It's quite fun to see those slight differences in action. Let me just reopen Photoshop as I'm doing that. Yal then says, can we go with harsh neon pink for important locations? No, we cannot. I am not going for that in the slightest. Yalb says, alternatively, we can go for grey for normal locations, then blue, yellow, orange, purple for increasingly important locations. You could, but I'm not doing that because that's harder work. And I guess green for sets, as in sets of locations. Yeah, that's just not happening. So I am definitely going to, what time are we at? Just so I get an idea. We're at 3 hour, 20 minute mark. We've been going for quite a while. Let me just take a quick drink here as Photoshop opens again in the background. Here we go. I'm definitely going to finish this section. I might go further, and I might also do another section, although time is ticking, and I'm going to have to get some sleep at some point, I presume. Let's have a quick check where we are, and let's check if it's running a bit more smoothly. Oh, it's still taking time to wake up. There we go. We're open. Also, while I'm here, why don't I open up this as a small aside and say that I'm busy working on this as well. Let me just pull it up. Oh, it's because I switched it off. I've got to re-enter it back in. So give me a second while I bring this back on. Share screen. Before you go, Martin, I just noticed that you're saying goodbye. You might want to just quickly see this one just because I've got it. Let's just add that to the screen. I'm busy working on another picture for my PCs. These are the new PCs for around 6 of them now, not longer the 5 from my first one. I'm going for quite a different look. Currently just shaved in a twin-tail comet into the side of his head, which is quite fun. Just added some leaves onto her. Going for a sort of very bland, pretty look for the elf. Going for a very fierce look for our human over there. Yeah, we're getting there. I'm still not quite happy with these. I've got a lot of work to do with him. Particularly, I'm not happy with Gerhardt, so I've got a lot of work to do to him. I think I'm going to probably put the Jungfreud symbol and extra feathers on it because you can't see the feathers there. All those images are actually getting made in a separate file and then ported into that particular image, which is quite fun to do. But that all aside, now they've done that, let's just check if there's any comments before I start doing the rest of the color. Griffin says, yeah. Yeah, I know where you're going with this one. Martin says, early start for me tomorrow. So I need to head off. Night, Martin. Fascinating stream as always. We'll cut out the locations tomorrow afternoon and catch up with the rest of the stream. There won't be that much more, I imagine. Yeah, then says, and I now know who's not a big MMORPG player. Actually, I'm not. It's fair to say. I used to play them tons when I was younger. Like, really young. Let's just not think about that. Lindsay used to play them far more. She was a big MMORPG fan. Night all. Night, Martin. Also, bye. And Martin then just says, just call me very nice. Wonder if you can guess the player from the art. I just closed it, didn't I? So you're not going to get a chance to see that again. And yeah, you might be able to guess the player from the art. That's an oddly handsome set of humans for Warhammer. We'll definitely need to see. It's interesting because we purposefully allowed fate to determine our characters. And at least 3 of them, I think, scored attractive. So they're not just potentially good looking for one reason or other. They're physically actually good looking with our random talent. So that was a thing. Very much the thing. What they've got is the beauty of youth, because they're all super young. One of them is only 17. We also randomized ages. I think our oldest one is only like 24. The elf is obviously much older, but she's in the equivalent of her adolescence. She's like the equivalent of a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid. So yeah, it's interesting. They've got the beauty of youth, but I'm quite convinced that's not going to be the case for very long. Already, Gerhardt, who I'm currently working on just now, he's got a pretty big scar sitting on one side of his face that he picked up from some of our pre-stream games. So that's going to be popping out. Yeah, I'm imagining that if these characters survive, they're going to look completely different in, say, about a year's time, as not only the injuries and the various maladies that they unfortunately suffer from are brought to the fore, but on top of that, you'll also have that world-weary, oh my goodness, what has happened effect to them. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I've changed the images from the original ones I did quite a bit because of the way that they've been played. And a lot of the original images that I did for the one that's sitting up on the Patreon, they were done very quickly back when the characters were first created, and they were very much almost like sketches to give everybody an idea of where we were. That very much has changed through the course of play. Birdie, that's the one that's sitting in the middle in white. Brunhilde, she's much, whoops, wrong color. She's much grimmer. So that was important to incorporate into, yeah, this is running very smoothly now, unlike what it was doing before. Glad I restarted it. Yeah, she's much grimmer, where Elric, the Bright Wizard, he's also a good bit grumpier and grimmer than initially came out because of what happened to him during the Bright College and how difficult he's found his life. Whereas Gerhardt is much happier, I'd argue, than my first art, and probably a good bit leaner and a touch more adult appearing. He's very young, but the image that I did for him is relatively soft, where the life he's lived didn't quite justify that. So I've turned it into a slightly different version of him. The elf, by comparison, she had to change completely. She has attractive. She's a spy. She purposely tries to make herself look as bland as possible with a simple smile. Getting that put across was super important. The art that was originally there was just hideously wrong. I also hated what I did for it. I just didn't like it. Didn't like where it landed. Didn't like where we ended it. So completely changed that. It's been a lot more fun doing this one because I could just do it from scratch rather than what I did for the first set. And that's been an awful lot of fun. Who else did we have? Discuss Birdie. Oh, the priest, Leopold. He had to come across as looking far more grumpy. Is that the right word? To a degree, he bears the responsibility, the weight of the world upon his shoulders. And ensuring that that was reflected in his image is pretty important. He's also really quite young, though. No, that doesn't go. So ensuring that he still looks sort of young, but a bit more world weary than I had him originally, where he just didn't look quite right. The player was kind of happy with it, but I wasn't. But then again, I'm never happy with anything that I create, so that's no great surprise. Okay, this place is almost done with its colors. Once I've done those, I'll check the comments one more time. I'll then do the highlights and shades. Once they're done, that'll be this entire section finished. And obviously, if I was doing this at home, which obviously I'm doing it at home, literally from my living room. But if I was doing this for myself, this whole map would have been finished. This whole section would have been finished this evening easily. But because I'm filling that all in. Because we're doing this for a stream with much chattage, these things take far longer to do. Normally, what I would do is, instead of deciding what all the locations are as I went along, I would map it all, and then afterwards start filling in all the locations, and then possibly changing some of the map to reflect the new areas we've done. Alternatively, as a second way of doing it, is I'd have all the text. This is generally what happens if I'm commissioned to do a map. So let's say the critical role one, I was sent the text in the book and said, I need that mapped. And I did. So that meant that the locations were already clear, where they were or where they might be. All I needed to do was build that into a full image. Take, for example, some of the old maps that I did for Warhammer on, say, the 2nd edition. When I did, say, the Erengrad map, all of the Erengrad writing had been done, in this case by David Chart. He wrote the Erengrad pieces inside Realm of the Ice Queen. I had at that point done a pass on it as well, because I was a co-author in that book. So I did a pass when all the writing was done, because I was the lore guy. And once that was all done, I took that writing and then translated it over. It was quite important that the version of Erengrad that David created also matched the version of Erengrad that was presented in the novels. And at that point, there was a few novels that were Erengrad at one point or another. For example, The Star of Erengrad, which was a novel concerning, well, strangely enough, the Star of Erengrad, a relatively important artifact. So we had to make sure that what was added to that married with and did not contradict that novel. My job was going through all the novels and making sure that everything that we created matched. Right, okay, that's that done. I'm going to check the comments. Once I've done the comments, I'm going to head off, finish off the highlights and shades. I'm probably going to finish on this section, unless, I don't. Yalb says, can't escape my bad ideas now. Oh, I presumably because Martin's gone. Let me check. And with Martin gone, it seems like back to the early days. Matt Kalegen, just you and me, Andy. Wouldn't surprise me. Although my little screeny bit in the corner says there's actually a few more hiding in the background, not necessarily dropping comments. By the way, I think that square building, the circle on top, wants to be a purple location of sorts. Not that I have a strong idea for now. I don't know if it does. I think it's nice to have some buildings that don't. I'm quite happy with the number that we have here. I don't think we necessarily need more. Also, we're at 3.5. If you don't want to go particularly long night, yeah, I know. That does actually concern me. So I'm going to finish this one, take a look at where we are. I'll put the line on for the wall color first. And then determine whether I'm going to do any more, but I'm probably not. I'm going to be good because I've got a session which I'm supposed to be recording tomorrow, which I've got to do. I've been writing rules all day today, so I'm quite tired. It's been a good day, though, for writing stuff. I've got a lot done. Right, let's get our highlights, our shades in this one. Okay, so that'll be there, that'll be there, there, on this side. Excellent. So I'm just going to go over the entirety of these buildings with all of their shades. We've discussed the shades and how they work before, and we've also discussed these shades make absolutely no sense in reality. The reason being is that assuming that this map is oriented to a north-south standard orientation with north at the top, south at the bottom, and if we have light coming in from the top, which we sort of do the top left, that means our sun is somehow up in the north. And that just doesn't work for the warmer world because that's not where the sun should be. However, it does look better for the map. So I'm doing it this way. If you have the shadows going upwards, you can make it look all right, but it's much harder. And I don't recommend it. The infamous mapping sun that doesn't pay attention to the laws of physics and gravity or astrophysics, I suppose. There we go. Just dropping in these shades, which again, as I've mentioned multiple times in the previous streams, do not need to be neat. But just dropping in these shades makes an enormous difference for pulling the map together as a single piece. It grounds each one of the buildings a little more firmly in reality. It makes it clear where the angles are, where the rises are. The longer shadows give the idea of taller buildings, shorter shadows give the idea of shorter buildings. So, for example, we can make our rat catchers building possibly more levels than it might initially have appeared to be from its simple drawing by simply making its shadow a little bit longer. And as I've also said in multiple times in the streams, the idea here is not to do it perfectly. We are giving the impression of shadows that the buildings are casting. And if you spend too long on these, you could spend ages making sure each shadow is right and accurately represents the point of a roof or the height of a tower. But as you often end up drawing over many of the shadows at a later date when you draw the next section in, it's just time not well spent. You want to be adding character that looks awesome, but doesn't take ages. So you just zoom over these. Almost there. Oh, and it's already beginning to look pretty cool. A little bit of shadows around the rougher areas too, to give the idea that the terrain isn't simply flat, which is what doing lots of buildings sometimes makes things look like. You're in a big flat area, where in reality most cities have got ups and downs all over the place. Not all, obviously. If you're living in, say, for example, one of the flyover states in America, I apologize if you live there and don't like the name flyover state, but there are so many very, very flat cities there where it just is flat and nothing but flat. Compare that to, say, where I live in Edinburgh, where it goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down all over the place. Something that we were very keen to ensure was the case when we were describing Middenheim for the Middenheim book. When I was doing the initial design documents for that and explaining some of the core ideas of what had to be in there, one of those was that general idea that Middenheim is a city that is not flat. We're almost there. Only this corner left to go, and then we'll do the highlights, then take a look at what we have. Almost there. Oh yeah. Okay. A little bit there. Have I missed any? Oh, yes, I have over here. And over here. Okay, cool. Oh, one that's there, one that's there. So many buildings in this, but it's really easy to miss a shade or two. Okay. Looks like them all. We're on the highlights. Before I do the highlights, I'll check the comments. Right. So we've got quite a few comments. Let me just pull down. Devin says, I'm still here. Delighted to hear that you're still here, Devin. I'm still mapping away on my stuff as you do. I'm delighted. If you are over in our Discord channel and you feel brave enough to share it, do share what you're mapping on, because, well, that's fun, isn't it? Sharing mappy stuff. I do. Ooh, I'm on my highlight mirror with my brush. I do tutorials for maps as well, over for the Rookery Discord. Oh, cripes! I need to put up a masterclass. I meant to have one up already. I got so caught up with writing rules I forgot to put that up. I'll put that up. I've got the blog going up tomorrow for our guest this Saturday, so I'll put it up then. Don't want to forget that. Got a new masterclass coming. Still unsure which one I'm going to go for. We've had quite a few suggestions, including a suggestion for doing castles, since we put a castle on this map. There's a big shadow there that I missed. Let me just quickly pop that in. I'm still unconvinced what I want to do for my next masterclass. The last one was doing maps that looked like scanners or something from Fallout, which was a surprisingly fun thing to do. In fact, if you want to check it out, I'll get you a link if you want to see what the thing looks like. It saves me having to draw all these highlights again. Let me just sign out. I think I popped up an art station. Let me just double check if it did go there. I'm pretty sure it did. So I'll go get it from there for you so you can get a link. And here's the link. Just about to come, Control C, and pop that in to here. There's the tutorial for not the tutorial, but the result from the tutorial from that one. That was quite a fun one. I enjoyed that map. Anyway, so yeah, if you are feeling brave, do feel free to share. And Janice says, is it Janice or Jen? I imagine it's Janice. I'm still here too. Also mapping, delighted. And again, if you're in the Discord, do feel free to drop your map because that's awesome. SD says, I think you missed a shadow on the south side roof of the biggest tenement building. And yes, I did. I think that's the one I just caught. So I'm assuming that's the one you're talking about. SD says, still here, as you can tell, starting to read some lore and ended up down a Skaven lore hole. Yeah, we've all been there. Yalib says, where I live, we basically have two very flat sections of the city, one higher and one lower, split by an old river escarpment. Interesting. Your tutorials are what got me mapping again. Oh, it's been a few years, so thanks. I'm delighted, Devin. Really happy to hear that. Oh, that was my link. And Yalib says, I wasn't going to bring mass classes up, but we did end up with February being skipped. We're not going to end up with February being skipped. I'm going to do it because I refuse to have February be skipped. I'm going to do that up for tomorrow, and then I'm on the wrong color. I'm going to have another one done this month as well. Might do two in a row. And we also have a gap coming up in that we're going to be ending this season of Inside the Rookery very soon. And when that gap comes up, I'll basically be filling up the spaces with some extra mapping bits so I can catch up from that too. Highlights. Who have we got coming this week? I forget. Next week, I believe it's Andy Hoare. For those of you who played Warhammer Total War, he's the writer for that. The game's just been nominated for a BAFTA, as I recall, Best British Game. And he's coming along to discuss adapting Warhammer in general, which would be a fun conversation, I reckon, because Andy is awesome. And adapting Warhammer is something that we've all done, as in everyone on the Rookery side at some point or another. So it's something that we can all contribute something to. But I'm particularly interested to hear about his experiences adapting Warhammer for the Total War game, which is so very different from the role-playing game and the angle it takes. So it'll be super fascinating to see what he has to say about that. I can't remember who's on the week after that, but I think that might almost be the last week that we have for this season, or the one after that's the last week. And then we'll have a break for about 3-4 weeks, and then we'll be back in with the next season. And we've already got some pretty damn awesome guests lined up for that one too. Quite looking forward to that. Right, so I got enough on that. Whoa, oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Oh no! Dang it, a whole bunch of those lines. Shouldn't even be there. Oh, it's the first time I've gone the wrong layer when I've been mapping. I'm on my lines layer instead of my highlights layer. Oh, what a mistake I'd make. Okay, cool. I'm going to add a little bit of color to some of the land in between the houses so that it can be, the parts that are road can be easily differentiated from the parts that aren't. So we'll do that as well. I'm probably going to go for a sort of palish brown because it's all going to be muddy here rather than going with the greens that you'll get elsewhere. Let me just check what that looks like. I want to go a bit paler than that. Let's drop it to that. Maybe a bit darker than that. Let's see what that looks like. That at least gives a bit of color. I'll add a little bit of green to some of these areas as well. Just enough to sink it into. Yeah, that's enough. Almost. I'm going to add a bit of green to that too. Just here or there, just a touch of green. Not necessarily grass, could just be moldy and horrible. Let's add a little bit of foliage and call this bit largely done unless I've missed a bit. Once I've put the foliage on, I'll check the comments and then we'll take a look at what we've done this evening so far. What am I going for? I'm going for that one. Right, so got to my tree layer, trees, and I want to pass these fine there. Maybe have a little bit inside there. And a little bit in there too. Certain amount of life coming out of some of these ruins as well. Right, that'll probably do. Yeah, okay. Let's zoom out and see what that looks like in comparison to the rest. Yeah, that's definitely expanded things a little bit on the outside of the wall. Yeah, says, oh damn, I'm jamming tomorrow. Yeah, me too. But the group ended up liking the one shot, even though we didn't manage to finish it. Hence the follow-up game tomorrow. Marvelous. We'll be starting a proper game later this month. Delighted. I'm glad it went well. And it seems somewhat likely we'll end up with a Badger rider in the group. Oh no, I can't keep saying no to new players. No, don't. I'm not even. I'm not even. No. Also hard no. Right. So with that, we have managed to finish off that section there, leaving us with Boggy Ground 2 and Bog 3 to organize for our next streams, because I think we will call it a night there, because we're now at 3 hours 42 minutes worth of streaming, which is pretty good going for evening. Thank you very much for those of you who've managed to last this long. It's been an absolute delight having you here. We will be here next Thursday where we'll move on to Boggy Ground 2 and the Bog 3, and we'll detail everything that we're dropping into there. It will be much like this stream, a mixture of mapping and chatting about everything that we're putting down. Please remember to throw a like on the video if you can, and do remember to subscribe. And if you haven't already popped over into our Discord channel, then please do so. I'll just bring up a link for that. I've got to scroll back through every single comment made in this one, though, to bring it up. Here is the link for Discord. It's at the very start of the comments. If you're sitting on YouTube just now and want to find it, if you scroll right up to the top, you'll find a direct link there. We also have a link to the Patreon. That's not because we want to nab all your money for everything we're doing. All these streams are 100% free, but that's where we do the blogs about everything that we're doing. The blogs that are public, which are like 80% of them, they'll tell you about when our next streams are, but they should be every single Thursday, and we'll be mapping our way through that. Also, if you're interested in what we're doing with Inside the Rookery with the master classes, just search for Inside the Rookery on Patreon and you will find us. But beyond that, we have made another pretty big significant step. Next week, it will be Boggy 2 and then Bog 3. Thanks so much. I am now going to call it a night and bid you all adieu. Thank you all so much. Let's have a quick goodbye from everyone. Goodbye, Yalab. Goodbye. Nice stream. Oh, thank you so much for saying so. It's been great. I've enjoyed it this evening. Thanks for the stream. Thanks in turn for Devon for turning up right to the end. Esty says, love the stream. Good night, all. Thank you so much for lasting all the way to the end, Esty. I'm impressed. Janice, it's been really interesting. Thanks. It's been a delight having you here as well. Thank you so much. It's not often we have people offering ideas who don't necessarily know Warhammer very well, so it's really appreciated. Thank you so much. And the bloke person offers wonderful stream as always, Andy. Thanks. And thank you in turn for offering ideas as we went. And other than that, all that comes from me is to say thank you all so much. I will see you next time when we continue to map Kalegen. It is definitely developing. See you all later. Bye-bye. Let's just wave.